She stood in my doorway with blood on her hands and two children who wouldn't speak. "Can you take us to town?" she asked. I should have said no. I should have turned them away. But when I looked into her eyes, I didn't see fear. I saw fire. The kind that burns everything in its path, including the men who deserve it. So I made her a deal. "Only if you promise to come back home." She agreed. That promise would cost us both everything. But some promises are worth keeping, even when they lead straight into hell. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind that night carried more than cold. It carried secrets. Elias Branton had learned to read the Wyoming darkness the way other men read newspapers. 20 years working this land had taught him that silence had texture, and tonight's silence felt wrong. It pressed against the ranch house walls like something living, something waiting. He'd been asleep maybe 2 hours when the sound woke him. Not the usual complaint of settling timber or the scratch of tumbleweeds against the barn. This was different, deliberate, the creak of wood under weight that didn't belong. Elias sat up in bed, every sense suddenly sharp. The moon through his window was a thin smile, barely enough light to see by. He listened, counting his own heartbeats, waiting for the sound to repeat itself so he could be sure he hadn't dreamed it. There. Again. Definitely the barn. He moved quietly, the way you do when you're not sure if you're dealing with a spooked horse or something worse. His clothes were where he'd left them, draped over the chair that had belonged to his father. Boots on, shirt buttoned only halfway. The revolver came off the bedside table with the familiar weight of cold steel in loaded chambers. The lantern was in the kitchen. He lit it with steady hands, watched the flame catch and settle, then adjusted the wick until the light was bright enough to be useful, but not so bright it would make him an easy target. Through the window, he could see the barn as a darker shadow against the dark sky. Nothing moved, but he knew better than to trust what he could see. The night air hit him like a fist when he opened the door. November in Wyoming didn't ease you into cold. It threw you in and held you under. His breath clouded white in the lantern light as he crossed the yard, his free hand resting on the revolver's grip. The ground was frozen solid, and his boots made small crunching sounds with each step. The barn door was open. He stopped. He always closed that door. Always. It was habit carved so deep into his bones that he'd done it automatically for 2 decades, even on nights when exhaustion made him stumble and curse. That door was never open. Elias raised the lantern higher and stepped into the threshold. "Don't shoot," a voice said. Female. Steady, despite the tremor underneath. "Please." He saw her then, emerging from the shadows near the horse stalls. A woman, maybe 30 years old, soaked through despite the fact that it hadn't rained in 3 days. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around a face too pale, too sharp with exhaustion. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Gray like winter sky, and absolutely unflinching. Behind her, pressed against the wall, were 2 children. A boy, maybe 8. A girl, younger. Neither made a sound, neither moved. They just stared at him with the kind of stillness you only see in prey animals who've learned that movement means death. "Who are you?" Elias kept his voice level, his hand still on the gun. "My name is Lydia Hale." She stood straighter, despite the way her whole body seemed to be shaking. "These are my children. We need help. This is private property." "I know." She didn't apologize, didn't beg, just held his gaze with an intensity that made something in his chest tighten. "I'm not here to steal or cause trouble. We just need—" She trailed off, and for the first time he saw past the steadiness to what lay beneath. Terror. Bone-deep, soul-crushing terror that she was holding back through sheer force of will. Elias lowered the lantern slightly and took a step closer. The light played across her face, revealing a bruise along her jaw that was trying to hide beneath the wet hair. His eyes traveled down. Her dress had been fine once, good fabric, careful stitching, but now it was torn at the shoulder and stained with something dark that might have been mud but probably wasn't. "You're bleeding," he said. Lydia glanced down at her hands as if surprised to find them attached to her body. Her palms were torn, raw, and red. "I fell. Several times." "Where's your husband?" Something flickered across her face. Not grief. Something harder. Dead. How long? 4 months. She swallowed. Give or take. Elias studied her. Every instinct he'd honed living alone on this land told him to be careful. Strange women didn't appear in your barn in the middle of the night by accident. They didn't arrive with silent children and wounds they couldn't explain. This was trouble. The kind that followed you home and burned down everything you'd built. But there was something else in her eyes. Something that called to a part of him he'd thought died with his brother 10 years ago. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who'd stood at the edge of something terrible and jumped anyway. "Can you take us to town?" Lydia asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a much louder question. "In the morning, when it's light, can you take us to Dry Creek?" He should say no. He knew that. Should point them back toward whatever road they'd wandered off of and let them become someone else's problem. He had supplies to order, fences to mend, a life that worked specifically because it was simple and solitary. "Please," she added, and it was the first time her voice cracked. Just a little. Just enough to let him hear what it was costing her to stand there and ask. Elias looked at the children again. The boy had moved slightly, positioning himself between his sister and the barn door. Protective. Old before his time. The girl was clutching something, a doll maybe, or a bundle of cloth. Her eyes were enormous in the lantern light. He sighed, long and slow, and knew he was making a mistake even as he made it. "Only if you promise to come back home," he said. Lydia blinked. "What?" "Only if you promise to come back home," Elias repeated. "After we go to town. Whatever business you have there, you come back here after. You don't run. You don't disappear. You come back." She stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. "Why would you want that?" "Because if you promise it, you'll keep it. I can see that about you." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the house. "And because trouble that runs just brings more trouble behind it, but trouble that stays put can be dealt with." For a long moment, Lydia didn't move. He could see her mind working, calculating, trying to figure out what kind of trap she'd walked into. Then slowly she nodded. "I promise," she said. "All right then." Elias turned toward the house. "Let's get you inside before you freeze to death in my barn. Wouldn't do my reputation any good." He was 3 steps away when he heard her move, felt rather than saw her gather the children close, heard the soft shuffle of feet on hay-strewn floor. When he glanced back, she was following, the children pressed against her sides like shadows. The house was dark and cool, but the hearth still held enough coals to coax back to life. Elias set the lantern on the table and went to work building up the fire, acutely aware of the woman and children standing just inside the door, not quite trusting enough to move deeper into the room. "You can sit," he said, without looking at them. "That chair there's solid. The bench, too." He heard fabric rustle. When he risked a glance over his shoulder, Lydia had settled onto the bench, the children bracketing her like bookends. None of them had taken off their coats, still not trusting, still ready to run. The fire caught, proper flames now instead of smoldering coals. Heat began to push back against the cold. Elias stood, brushing ash from his hands. "I'll make coffee," he said. "You don't have to. I'm making it anyway. Might as well make enough." He moved through the familiar motions of his kitchen, hyper-aware of the strangers in his home. The coffee pot, the grounds, the water from the pump. Everything felt strange now, observed. The silence stretched between them like frozen rope. It was the boy who finally spoke. "Is this your ranch?" His voice was small but clear, careful. Elias looked at him properly for the first time. 8 years old, he'd guessed, and he wasn't far off. The boy had dark hair like his mother, but his eyes were different, brown where hers were gray. There was something old in his face, something that had seen things children shouldn't see. "It is," Elias said. "My father built the house, I built the barn, added the southern pasture 5 years back." "It's nice." The boy hesitated. "Quiet." "That it is." "We like quiet," the girl whispered. It was the first sound she'd made, barely audible. "We haven't had quiet in a long time." Something in Elias's chest cracked a little. He turned back to the stove before the feeling could show on his face. "Well, you've got it now," he said. "All the quiet you want." The coffee finished brewing. He poured 3 cups, then looked at the children and poured 2 glasses of milk from the cold box. When he brought them to the bench, Lydia's hands wrapped around the tin cup like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and retreated to his own chair across the room, close enough to talk, far enough not to crowd. He sipped his coffee and watched them warm up, watched color slowly return to Lydia's face, and the children's fingers stopped their trembling. It was only then that he noticed what he'd missed before. 3 crates, stacked near the door. Old shipping crates, the kind that once held dry goods or tools. They were battered, water-stained, and didn't match each other. But they were here. She'd brought them. "Those yours?" he asked, nodding toward them. Lydia followed his gaze. Her jaw tightened. "Yes." "Heavy?" "Heavy enough." "What's in them?" She met his eyes over the rim of her cup. "The reason we're running." Elias felt the room shift. Not physically. Nothing moved. But the weight of those words settled over everything like snow, muffling and cold. He'd known it was coming, this moment. Known since he first saw her in the barn that she wasn't just running from something. She was running with something. "You going to tell me what that means?" he asked. "Not tonight." Lydia's voice was firm. "Tonight we sleep. Tomorrow we go to town. After that," she paused. "After that, I'll tell you everything." He should push, should demand answers now while she was in his house drinking his coffee. But when he looked at the children, the way they'd finally started to relax, the way the girl's eyes were drooping despite her obvious effort to stay alert, he found he couldn't. "There are 2 rooms upstairs," he said instead. "Mine, and one that was my brother's. You and the girl can take his room. The boy can sleep in mine. I'll stay down here." "We couldn't." "You can, and you will." He stood, setting his empty cup on the table with a finality that ended the discussion. "I'll get blankets." He climbed the stairs, found the linens in the chest where his mother had kept them 30 years ago, and brought them down. Lydia was standing now, helping the children out of their coats. In the firelight, he could see more bruises. Not just on her, but on the boy's arm. Fresh ones. Recent ones. His hands tightened on the blankets. "Up you go," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'll show you the rooms." The children climbed the stairs with the exhausted determination of soldiers on their last march. Lydia followed, one hand trailing on the wall as if she needed the support. At the top, he pointed to the doors. "That one was Daniel's. Bed's made. Should be clean enough." "Thank you," Lydia said again. She seemed to be saying it a lot, like she couldn't quite believe someone was being kind to her. The girl was already asleep by the time Lydia lowered her onto the bed. Didn't even stir when her mother pulled off her boots and tucked the blanket around her small body. The boy stood in the doorway of Elias's room, looking uncertain. "Go on," Elias said. "Bed's yours for tonight." "What if—" The boy stopped, started again. "What if someone comes?" "No one's coming." "You don't know that." It wasn't accusatory, just factual. "They always come." Elias crouched down until he was eye level with the boy. "Listen to me. This is my land, my home. I've protected it from rustlers, wolves, winter storms, and worse. If someone comes here looking for you, they'll have to go through me, and I don't go down easy, understand?" The boy searched his face, looking for lies or false promises. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "What's your name, son?" "Thomas." "Thomas Hale." "Well, Thomas Hale, you get some sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch, and we've got a ride ahead of us." Thomas nodded again and disappeared into the bedroom. Through the open door, Elias watched him climb into the bed fully clothed, pulling the blanket up to his chin. His eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling, still on guard, still protecting his family even in sleep. Lydia was standing in the hallway when Elias turned around. The firelight from downstairs cast her face in alternating shadow and gold. "He's not mine," she said quietly. "Thomas, he's not my son." Elias waited. "Neither is the girl. Her name is Sarah." Lydia's voice was steady now, emptied of everything except exhausted truth. "I took them 4 months ago. Took them and ran." From who? From the people who had them. From the people who've had lots of children. She wrapped her arms around herself. From a system that was going to kill them, one way or another. That's in the crates, Elias said. Not a question. Yes. Evidence. Enough to hang a dozen men. Maybe more. He should be afraid, should be calculating how fast he could get them off his property. Instead, he felt something else, something that felt dangerously close to purpose. Get some sleep, Mrs. Hale, he said. Lydia, just Lydia. Get some sleep, Lydia. We leave at first light. She nodded and moved toward the bedroom where Sarah slept. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at him. Why are you helping us? She asked. Elias considered the question, considered lying or giving some easy answer about Christian charity or basic human decency. But something about this woman, about this night, demanded honesty. My brother died 10 years ago, he said. Murdered by men who thought they were above the law. I had evidence. I had witnesses. But the men who killed him had money, and money buys silence better than anything else. They walked free. Daniel stayed in the ground. So when you showed up in my barn with crates full of evidence and 2 children who've seen hell, he trailed off, then met her eyes. I guess I'm helping because this time maybe the evidence won't disappear. Maybe this time the bad men don't win. Lydia's eyes shimmered in the dim light. She opened her mouth, closed it, then simply nodded. No words were enough. She disappeared into the bedroom and the door clicked shut behind her. Elias stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the house settle around him. New sounds now, the creak of bed springs, the whisper of fabric, the soft, almost inaudible sound of a woman crying into a pillow, trying to be quiet, trying not to wake the children. He went downstairs and laid out his bedroll near the fire. The revolver went on the floor beside him, within easy reach. Through the window he could see the barn and beyond it, the road that led to Dry Creek. 15 miles of frozen earth and exposed prairie. They'd have to take the wagon, have to go slow with the children and those 3 damned crates. His eyes drifted to the crates now, sitting innocent as church pews near his door. Tomorrow he'd ask to see what was inside. Tomorrow he'd understand exactly what kind of trouble he'd invited into his life. But tonight, he'd keep watch. Because Thomas was right. They always came. Men like the ones Lydia was running from didn't let evidence walk away. Didn't let witnesses escape. They hunted. They found. They silenced. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind picked up, howling across the empty plains like something lost and looking for home. Elias closed his eyes but didn't sleep. Every sense stayed alert, tuned to the frequency of danger. Somewhere upstairs, Thomas was probably doing the same thing. 2 guards, watching different doors, protecting the same people. The night stretched on, cold and infinite. And in those dark hours before dawn, Elias Branton made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't just take them to town. He wouldn't just help them deliver their evidence. He would stand between them and whoever came looking. He would be the wall they hid behind. He would be the gun that fired when firing was needed. Because some promises, the ones made in darkness to strangers with nowhere else to go, were the only kind worth keeping. The first gray light of morning was touching the horizon when Elias finally heard the sounds from upstairs cease. Lydia had stopped crying. Thomas's restless movements had stilled. Even Sarah, who had whimpered once in her sleep, had gone quiet. They were resting. Finally, blessedly resting. Elias stood and stretched, his back complaining about the floor and the cold. He fed the fire, put coffee on to boil, and went to the barn to prepare the wagon. The horses needed harnessing, the wagon bed needed hay for the children to sit on, and those 3 crates needed to be loaded carefully, securely. The evidence, the reason, the truth that someone was willing to kill for. He worked quickly, efficiently, as the sun pulled itself over the edge of the world. By the time he heard the door open and saw Lydia emerge with the children, everything was ready. She'd cleaned up somehow, washed her face, tied back her hair, but the bruises were still visible, the exhaustion still carved into her features. Thomas walked close to her side, and Sarah held her hand with a grip that looked painful. "Ready?" Elias asked. Lydia looked at the wagon, at the road stretching toward town, at the vast empty sky above them. Then she looked at him. "No," she said honestly, "but we're going anyway." Good answer. He helped them into the wagon, lifted each crate with a grunt of effort, secured them with rope. 15 miles. We should make it by noon if the weather holds. And if it doesn't, then we make it by evening. He climbed onto the driver's bench, took up the reins. Either way, we make it. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, horses snorting steam in the cold air. Behind them, the ranch grew smaller, swallowed by distance. Ahead, Dry Creek waited with its questions, its sheriff, its secrets. And in the wagon bed, surrounded by hay and morning light, 3 people carried the weight of truth toward judgment. Elias glanced back once. Lydia was staring at the horizon, her face unreadable. But her hand had found Thomas's, and Sarah was pressed against her side. Together, still together. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. And that, Elias thought as he turned back to the road, made all the difference. The cold bit deeper as they traveled, cutting through layers of wool and determination with equal ease. Elias kept the horses at a steady pace, not pushing them, but not lingering either. The wagon wheels carved fresh tracks in the frozen earth, and behind them, the ranch disappeared into the gray distance like something from a half-remembered dream. For the first hour, no one spoke. The silence felt natural, almost necessary, a buffer between the violence they'd left behind and whatever waited ahead. Elias watched the road and the horizon with equal attention, his eyes scanning for movement, for dust clouds, for anything that didn't belong to the empty prairie. It was Thomas who finally broke the quiet. "Mr. Branton?" The boy's voice carried forward from the wagon bed, small against the wind. "Elias is fine, son." "Elias, then." A pause. "Are you scared?" The question hung in the cold air, honest and raw. Elias considered lying, offering some reassurance about how everything would be fine. But he'd made a promise to himself in the dark hours of morning, no more lies. Not to these people. "Yes," he said, "I'm scared." Lydia shifted in the wagon bed. He could feel her attention sharpen, though she didn't speak. "Of what?" Thomas pressed. "Of not being fast enough. Of making the wrong choice. Of letting down people who are counting on me." Elias adjusted his grip on the reins. "But fear's not a bad thing, Thomas. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you alive. It's only dangerous when it stops you from moving forward. My father used to say fear was weakness." The boy's voice went flat. He said weak people don't survive. "Your father was wrong." The words came out harder than Elias intended, sharp enough that even the horse's ears twitched. He softened his tone. "The strongest people I've ever known were scared of something. They just didn't let it own them." Lydia spoke then, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone listen. "Thomas's father is dead. Has been for 4 months." "I know, you told me. What I didn't tell you is that I'm the one who killed him." The wagon kept rolling, but the world seemed to stop around them. Elias's hands tightened on the reins, though he forced himself to keep looking forward, keep the horses steady. "You going to explain that?" he asked quietly. "He was going to kill Thomas. Would have done it that night if I hadn't—" She trailed off. "I didn't plan it. Didn't think about it. I just saw him raising that fireplace poker, saw Thomas on the floor bleeding, and something in me broke. Or maybe it finally fixed itself. I hit him with the first thing I could reach, a cast iron skillet. Hit him hard enough that he didn't get back up." Sarah made a small sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh. Lydia's arm tightened around her. "The sheriff in our town called it self-defense when I reported it. My husband had a reputation, you see. Everyone knew what he was, even if they pretended not to. So they let me bury him and thought that was the end of it." Her voice went cold. But it wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. Elias finally risked a glance back. Lydia sat straight-backed against the wagon side, her face carved from exhaustion and determination. The children pressed close to her, forming a small fortress of bodies against the wind. "What happened next?" he asked. "I found his office 3 days after the funeral. He'd kept it locked always, but I had the key then. Widow's privilege." The bitterness in her voice could have cut glass. "I thought I'd find debt papers, maybe some evidence of gambling. Instead, I found hell, neatly documented in ledgers and maps." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Elias guided the horses around a frozen rut in the road, buying time to process what she was telling him. My husband worked for his brother, Victor Hale. Together, they ran what they called a placement service for women and children, orphans mostly, widows with nowhere to go, girls from immigrant families who didn't speak English well enough to ask questions. Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. They promised jobs, education, fresh starts. What they delivered was forced labor, farms where the women couldn't leave, households where children worked 18 hours a day, places worse than prisons because at least in prison, people know you're there. Jesus Christ, Elias breathed. The ledgers showed everything, names, ages, where they came from, where they were sent. Some entries had dates of death noted in the margins, like they were livestock that didn't make it through winter. Her voice cracked, but didn't break. I found letters too, desperate letters from families looking for daughters who'd disappeared, from brothers searching for sisters. All of them filed away, unanswered, unimportant. Thomas spoke up, his voice steady despite the tremor underneath. My real mama was in those letters. She wrote to the placement service asking about me. They never wrote back. Elias felt his chest tighten. How old were you when they took you? 5. I barely remember her face now, but I remember her voice. She sang to me at night. The boy looked down at his hands. I hope she stopped looking. I hope she thought I was dead and moved on. That'd be better than knowing I was alive and couldn't come home. The wagon rolled on through the cold morning, carrying its cargo of broken histories and dangerous truths. Elias tried to imagine what Lydia must have felt, opening those ledgers, discovering her dead husband's sins laid out in neat columns, realizing she'd shared a bed with a monster and never known. You said Thomas isn't yours, he said carefully. No, I found him at one of the placement houses. Victor had invited me to visit, said it would be good for me to see the charitable work the family was doing. Lydia's laugh was bitter. He showed me the nice rooms, the clean dormitories, but Thomas was there too, in a basement room with 6 other boys. He had a black eye and a cough that sounded like death. When I asked about him, Victor said he was being disciplined for laziness. I wasn't lazy, Thomas said quietly. I was sick, had pneumonia, couldn't work fast enough. I knew right then that I had to get him out. Had to get all of them out, but I couldn't figure how. Not yet. Lydia pulled Sarah closer. Then I met Sarah. She was at a different house, one Victor didn't know I'd found. A woman there was using children for— Don't, Elias interrupted. His voice was rough. You don't have to say it. Lydia nodded, grateful. Sarah was 4 years old and hadn't spoken in 6 months. The woman told me she was simple-minded, useless. I knew better. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't simple. She was surviving the only way she knew how. By disappearing? Elias said softly. Yes. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip of hooves. The sun climbed higher but brought no warmth, just harsh light that made the frozen landscape look even more desolate. It was Sarah who finally spoke, her voice so small Elias almost missed it. I talk now because Lydia promised the bad woman can't hurt me anymore. That's right, sweetheart, Lydia said, kissing the top of her head. She can't hurt you. No one can. But what about the bad man? Sarah's face tilted up, eyes wide with fear that no 4-year-old should know. The one who came to the house, the one who scared you. Lydia's face went tight. What bad man, baby? The one last night. Before we ran to the barn. He was at our door talking loud. You told us to hide in the wagon, remember? Elias pulled the horses to a stop. The wagon settled with a creak of wood and leather. He turned fully around now, looking at Lydia with new intensity. Someone came to your house last night? Lydia's face had gone pale. Victor, he found out I'd taken the ledgers. I don't know how, but he knew. Came to my door at sunset, all smiles and concern. Said he was worried about his brother's widow, wanted to make sure I was managing, but his eyes— She shuddered. His eyes were looking for those crates. He knew I had them. What did you tell him? Nothing. I told him I was fine, that I just needed time to grieve. He left, but— She looked at the children, then back at Elias. As he was walking away, he turned and said, Family business should stay in the family, Lydia. It It would be a shame if outsiders got involved. Outsiders have a way of getting hurt. So you ran. I packed what I could carry, loaded the crates in a cart I borrowed from a neighbor, and we left. I didn't know where we were going, just that we had to move. We walked for hours in the dark. The cart broke down about a mile from your ranch. I saw your lights and thought, she gestured helplessly. I thought maybe God hadn't completely abandoned us. Elias turned back to the road, his mind working through scenarios, calculating distances and timelines. If Victor had visited at sunset and they'd arrived at his barn around midnight, that was 6 hours. Not enough time for Victor to organize a search party in the dark, but more than enough time for him to have people watching the roads by morning. We need to stop, he said abruptly. What? Why? Because if Victor's smart, and I'm guessing he is, he'll have men watching the direct route to Dry Creek. We've been on the main road for an hour now, too exposed. He guided the horses off the road, toward a line of cottonwoods that marked a frozen stream. We'll rest here. Let me think. The trees offered some shelter from the wind and from watching eyes. Elias helped everyone down from the wagon, then moved to check the horses while his mind raced through options. They could backtrack, take the long way around through the Prescott Valley. That would add 8 hours to their journey and put them on roads he didn't know as well. Or they could push forward, fast and hard, and hope to reach Dry Creek before anyone caught up. Both options felt like gambling with lives that weren't his to wager. Elias, Lydia was standing close, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear. You don't have to do this. You can leave us here, point us toward town, and go home. This isn't your fight. He looked at her, really looked at her. In the gray morning light, she seemed both young and ancient, worn down by horrors, but somehow still standing. There was steel in her spine that no amount of fear could bend. You promised to come back, he said. I did. But I'll release you from the bargain if I don't want to be released. The words came out rougher than he intended. Those children deserve better than what they got. Those women in the ledgers deserve justice. And you, he stopped, searching for the right words. You deserve someone standing beside you when you face this. So no, I'm not leaving. Lydia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You could die. We all die eventually. Might as well die doing something that matters. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be funny, just honest. He moved past her to the wagon, started untying the ropes that held the crates. Now help me. I want to see what we're carrying. They lifted down the first crate together. It was heavier than it looked, solid and dense. Elias pried open the lid with his knife, and Lydia held her breath. Inside were ledgers. Dozens of them, bound in leather, pages filled with cramped handwriting. Names and numbers marched in columns, dates, ages, physical descriptions. Some entries were circled in red ink. Others had lines drawn through them with a single word written in the margin, deceased. My God, Elias whispered. He picked up one ledger at random, opened it to the middle. A name caught his eye. Margaret Sullivan, age 14, placed with the Harrison Farm, August 1885. Beneath it, deceased, winter 1886. Cause, exposure. A 14-year-old girl had frozen to death, and all she got was a 2-word note in a ledger. There are more, Lydia said, opening the second crate. This one held maps, detailed drawings of territories across Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas. Each map was marked with symbols, houses, farms, work camps. Beside each symbol was a number indicating how many people were placed there. The third crate was the worst. Letters, hundreds of them, still in their envelopes. Desperate letters from families, formal letters from authorities, threatening letters from people who'd asked too many questions, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small leather pouch. Elias picked it up, felt the weight shift inside. He loosened the drawstring and poured some of the contents into his palm. Gold coins. At least $100 worth, maybe more. Blood money, Lydia said. Payment from the farms and houses. I took it because I thought we might need it. I thought... She looked away. I'm a thief and a killer now. Not much better than they are. Stop that. Elias's voice was sharp. You're nothing like them. They killed for profit. You killed to save a life. And this money? He poured the coins back into the pouch. This money bought children suffering. It should buy their freedom instead. He repacked the crates carefully, making sure everything was secure. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from rage. How many names were in those ledgers? How many lives stolen, used up, thrown away? And Victor Hale walked free, probably eating a good breakfast right now, planning his next move. "We're going to make this right," Elias said. He didn't recognize his own voice. It sounded like someone harder, someone capable of violence if violence was needed. "We're going to get these to people who can act on them." "The sheriff in Dry Creek might be one of Victor's men," Lydia warned. "My husband used to talk about people he'd paid off. I never knew who, but then we don't stop at the sheriff." Elias was thinking fast now, running through everyone he knew in town. "We go to Reverend Matthews first. He's a hard man to corrupt, and he's got connections to the territorial authorities. If anyone can get this evidence to the right people, it's him." "You trust him?" "With my life, and more importantly, with yours." They loaded the crates back into the wagon, secured them under canvas this time to keep them hidden. The children had been exploring the frozen stream bed, finding patterns in the ice, and now they returned with red cheeks and slightly lighter spirits. "Are we going to be okay?" Thomas asked. It was such a simple question, and it deserved an honest answer. "I don't know," Elias said, "but we're going to try our damnedest to make sure you are." They climbed back into the wagon, resumed their journey. But instead of returning to the main road, Elias guided them along a hunter's track that ran parallel to it, hidden by brush and terrain. It would slow them down, but it might also keep them alive. The sun climbed higher, though it gave off more light than heat. The landscape rolled by in shades of gray and brown, dormant grass, bare trees, sky like dirty wool, beautiful in its own harsh way, but unforgiving. Wyoming didn't care about human troubles. It would kill you just as easily whether you were innocent or guilty. Around noon, they stopped again to rest the horses and let the children stretch their legs. Elias had packed some bread and dried meat before they left, and they ate in silence, huddled against the wagon for warmth. It was then that Lydia asked the question he'd been expecting. "Why did you really help us? Last night you said it was because of your brother, but there's more to it than that, I can tell." Elias chewed slowly, buying time. The truth felt too big for his mouth, too heavy for words, but she deserved it. "I was supposed to get married," he said finally. 10 years ago, girl named Rebecca Carson. She was—" He smiled despite the pain. "She was everything good. Kind, funny, smarter than me by half. We had plans, ranch here, build it bigger, fill it with children and noise and life. What happened? My brother Daniel was supposed to pick her up from town one day. Her family lived 15 miles south, and she was coming to visit. Daniel was young, excited to help, thought he was old enough to handle the wagon alone. Elias stared at his hands. 3 men stopped him on the road, said they wanted the wagon. Daniel probably tried to be brave, probably talked back. They shot him and left him to die in the dirt. Rebecca was in the wagon. They took her. Lydia's hand found his arm, squeezed gently. We found Daniel that evening. He lived long enough to tell us what happened, to describe the men. We knew who they were, local troublemakers, sons of a rancher who had money and connections. The sheriff arrested them, but they never went to trial. Their father made it disappear, paid the right people, threatened the right witnesses. His voice went flat. They walked free. Rebecca. He swallowed hard. They found her body 2 weeks later. She'd been kept alive for a while, used. When they were done, they killed her and dumped her like garbage. Oh God, Elias. I tried to do something, tried to get justice, but money talks louder than dead girls and heartbroken ranchers. So eventually I stopped trying, stopped living really. Just existed here, alone, doing the work because that's what you do. You keep going even when there's no point. He looked at her finally, met those gray eyes that understood loss too well. Then you showed up in my barn with evidence that could actually matter, with children who could actually be saved. And I thought, he paused, I thought maybe this was God giving me another chance. A chance to do what I couldn't do for Daniel and Rebecca. A chance to make sure the bad men don't win this time. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I'm sorry for all of it, for bringing this to your door. Don't be. You didn't bring danger. You brought purpose. He stood, brushed crumbs from his pants. Now let's make it count. They traveled on as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust. The hunter's track eventually merged back with the main road as they got closer to Dry Creek, and Elias felt the tension ratchet up with every mile. This was the dangerous part, the last stretch where they were most exposed, most vulnerable. Thomas must have felt it too because he suddenly asked, "Do you know how to shoot that gun?" Elias patted the revolver at his hip. "I do." "Are you good at it?" "Good enough." "Would you shoot someone if they tried to hurt us?" It was Lydia who answered, her voice firm. "Thomas, don't ask questions like that." "Why not?" "I want to know if we're safe." "Because some questions don't have good answers, baby." But Elias turned around, looked the boy straight in the eye. "Yes, if someone tried to hurt you or your sister or Lydia, I would shoot them. Not because I want to, not because I like violence, but because protecting people who can't protect themselves is worth whatever it costs." Thomas nodded slowly, satisfied. Sarah, who'd been quiet most of the journey, suddenly spoke up. "You're a good man, like the men in Lydia's stories." "What stories are those?" Elias asked. "The ones about knights and dragons. The knights always protect people even when they're scared." Sarah smiled, small and tentative. "Are you scared right now?" "Terrified," Elias admitted. "Me too, but I feel safer with you here." Something in Elias's chest loosened at those words. A 4-year-old girl who'd seen more horror than most adults had just told him she felt safe. That meant something, maybe everything. "We're close now," he said, facing forward again. "Another hour, and we'll be in Dry Creek." The town appeared on the horizon as the sun touched the edge of the world. A cluster of buildings huddled against the prairie, smoke rising from chimneys, lights beginning to glow in windows. It looked peaceful, welcoming. But Elias knew appearances lied. He guided the wagon down the main street, hyper-aware of every person they passed, every face that turned to watch them. A woman sweeping her porch. A man loading supplies. A group of boys playing in an alley. Any of them could be Victor's eyes. The church stood at the far end of town, white paint peeling but its bell tower still proud. Elias pulled up to the side entrance, the one that led directly to the Reverend's quarters. "Stay here," he told them. "Keep quiet. I'll get the Reverend." He knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps. Waited. Knocked again. Finally, footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal Reverend Matthews, 60 years old, thin as wire, with eyes that missed nothing. "Elias Branton, didn't expect to see you." The Reverend's gaze moved past him to the wagon, to the woman and children huddled there. "What's this about?" "I need your help, and your discretion." "Come in." "The woman and children too, and 3 crates that stay with us." Reverend Matthews studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Bring them." They moved quickly, quietly, carrying the crates into the Reverend's small study. Lydia kept the children close, her eyes darting to every shadow. Once inside, Reverend Matthews locked the door and drew the curtains. "Now," he said, "tell me everything." Elias let Lydia do the talking. She laid it out clearly, calmly, starting with her husband's death and ending with their arrival in town. As she spoke, they opened the crates, showed the Reverend the ledgers, the maps, the letters. His face grew harder with each revelation. When Lydia finished, the room was silent except for the tick of a clock on the wall. "Victor Hale," the Reverend finally said. "I knew the family had money. Didn't know it came soaked in blood." "Can you help us?" Lydia asked. "Can you get this to someone who will act on it?" "I can. Federal Marshal Thompson is due through here in 2 days. He's an honest man. Can't be bought, can't be scared. If anyone can bring Victor down, it's him." He paused. "But 2 days is a long time when someone's hunting you." "We'll manage," Elias said. "Will you?" The Reverend fixed him with a knowing look. "Victor Hale has resources, men on his payroll. He won't let this go." "I know. You might die protecting these people." "I know that too." "And you're willing to accept that?" Elias glanced at Lydia, at the children who'd finally relaxed enough to sit down, at the crates full of stolen lives and delayed justice. "Yes," he said. "I am." Reverend Matthews nodded slowly. "Then I'll help. These crates stay with me. I'll guard them until the marshal arrives. You take these people somewhere safe, somewhere Victor won't think to look." "The ranch?" "No, too obvious. He'll check there first." The Reverend thought for a moment. "There's an old homestead about 5 miles north. Been abandoned for years, but the structure's sound. No one goes there. You could hole up until the marshal comes." It was a good plan, the best they had. But something in Elias's gut twisted at the thought of running further, of hiding when they were so close to ending this. "We'll think about it," he said. They stayed in the Reverend's study for another hour, resting, warming up, letting the children eat a real meal. Sarah fell asleep in Lydia's lap, and Thomas sat by the window, still on guard even in sanctuary. As night fell completely, Reverend Matthews walked them to the door. "Be careful," he said. "Victor's probably got men in town already. Trust no one." "I won't," Elias promised. They stepped out into the cold night, and that's when Elias saw him, a man standing across the street, watching the church. Just standing there, not moving, his face hidden in shadow. "Get in the wagon," Elias said quietly. "Now." They moved fast, piling in while Elias climbed onto the bench and took up the reins. The man across the street didn't follow, didn't shout. He just watched as they drove away. But Elias knew what that meant. Victor knew they were here. The net was tightening. They made it 3 blocks before Lydia gasped. "Elias, behind us." He looked back and saw 2 riders emerging from an alley, following at a distance. Not rushing, just following, making sure they knew they were being watched. "Hold on," Elias said, and snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward, and the wagon picked up speed, rattling over the frozen street. Behind them, the riders sped up too. They raced through town, past dark buildings and empty lots, the sound of hoofbeats echoing off walls. Elias pushed the horses harder than he should have, but there was no choice. They had to get clear of town, had to reach open ground where he could see what was coming. The riders were gaining. Elias could hear them now, close enough that he could make out their shouts to each other. 2 of them, maybe more coming. He pushed the horses harder still, felt the wagon threatening to tip on the frozen ruts. "Thomas!" he shouted. "In the back, under the canvas. There's a rifle. Get it." The boy scrambled to obey, pulling back the canvas and finding the Winchester Elias kept for wolves. He handed it forward, and Elias took it with one hand, keeping the reins in the other. "Can you shoot from a moving wagon?" Lydia asked, her voice steady despite the fear. "We're about to find out." The riders were close now, close enough that Elias could see their faces in the moonlight. Young men, hired guns probably, looking for easy money. They didn't know what they were chasing, didn't care. One of them raised his own rifle, sighting down the barrel at the wagon. Elias made a choice. He pulled the horses to a sudden stop, nearly throwing everyone forward. Before the riders could react, he stood up in the wagon bed, raised the Winchester, and fired. The shot went wide, intentionally. He wasn't trying to kill anyone, just scare them, make them think twice. It worked. The riders pulled up short, their horses rearing. In that moment of confusion, Elias snapped the reins again and got the wagon moving. By the time the riders recovered, they'd opened up 100 yards of distance. But the riders were coming again, and this time they weren't alone. More shapes emerged from the darkness. 4, 5, maybe 6 riders now, all converging on the wagon. "Elias!" Lydia's voice was sharp with fear. He saw it then. A side road, barely visible in the moonlight. It led away from town, toward rough country where wagons weren't meant to go. But it was their only chance. He yanked the reins hard, and the horses veered onto the side road. The wagon tilted dangerously but held. Behind them, the riders shouted in anger, their plans disrupted. The road, if it could even be called that, was rough and treacherous. Frozen earth, hidden rocks, sudden dips that made the wagon bounce and groan. But Elias kept pushing, kept the horses moving, until the lights of Dry Creek faded behind them and they were swallowed by the dark prairie. Only then did he slow down, listening for pursuit. He could hear it, distant hoofbeats growing fainter. They'd lost them, at least for now. Everyone all right? He asked. We're fine, Lydia said, though her voice shook. Sarah's scared, but fine. Thomas? I'm good. The boy's voice was steadier than it should have been. That was close. Too close. Elias looked around, trying to get his bearings in the darkness. They were miles from anywhere now, alone on the prairie with winter closing in, and Victor's men somewhere behind them. The abandoned homestead the Reverend mentioned was north, but Elias wasn't sure he could find it in the dark. And going back to town was suicide. What do we do? Lydia asked. Elias thought about the ranch, about the life he'd built there through years of hard work and loneliness. Thought about the promise he'd made to protect these people. Thought about Daniel and Rebecca and all the times he'd failed to act. We keep going, he said. We find shelter, wait out the night, and in the morning we figure out our next move. And if they find us before morning? He checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded. Then we fight. The wagon rolled on through the darkness, carrying its precious cargo toward an uncertain dawn. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky, cold and distant and uncaring. But inside the wagon, pressed together for warmth and courage, 4 people held on to hope with bleeding fingers. And sometimes, Elias thought, hope was enough. Sometimes it had to be. They found the homestead just as the first gray light touched the horizon. It rose from the prairie like a broken tooth, walls still standing but sagging, roof intact in some places and collapsed in others, windows dark as empty eye sockets. But it was shelter, and shelter was all that mattered now. Elias guided the exhausted horses into what remained of the barn, a structure that leaned so far to one side it seemed to defy physics. The animals were trembling, foam-flecked and spent. He unhitched them quickly, rubbed them down with handfuls of dead grass, and covered them with blankets from the wagon. They'd given everything, these horses, deserved better than to freeze in an abandoned barn while their owner played at being a hero. Inside the homestead, Lydia had already assessed their situation with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to survive on instinct. The main room was the most intact. 4 walls, most of a roof, a stone fireplace that might still draw if the chimney wasn't completely blocked. She'd laid out the blankets in the corner farthest from the door, positioned the children where they'd be warmest, and was now examining the fireplace with a critical eye. Will it work? Elias asked, bringing in the last of their supplies. Only one way to find out. She crumpled some paper from one of the ledgers, a blank page, nothing important, and added kindling from the pile of broken furniture scattered around the room. When Elias struck the match, the paper caught immediately, flames hungry and bright. For a terrible moment, smoke filled the room, and Elias thought the chimney was blocked after all. Then it drew, suddenly and completely, pulling the smoke up and out. The fire settled into a steady burn, and warmth began to push back against the cold that had seeped into their bones. Thomas and Sarah huddled by the flames, their faces showing the exhaustion that adrenaline had been holding at bay. Now that they'd stopped moving, now that the immediate danger had passed, the weight of the past 24 hours crashed down on them like a physical thing. Sleep, Lydia told them. I'll keep watch. We both will, Elias said. He positioned himself by the window, or what was left of it, where he could see the approach from town. The Winchester lay across his knees, loaded and ready. You should rest too. You're dead on your feet. So are you. I'm used to it. Ranch work doesn't stop for tired. He looked at her properly for the first time since they'd fled Dry Creek. Her dress was torn now, not just at the shoulder, but along the hem where it had caught on the wagon. Her face was gray with exhaustion, bruises standing out like ink stains. But her eyes were still sharp, still defiant. When did you last sleep? Really sleep? 4 months ago. The night before I found the ledgers. She said it like it was a joke, but Elias heard the truth underneath. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. All those names in the books. All those children who didn't make it out. You can't save everyone. I know, but I saved 2. That's 2 more than were saved before. She moved to sit beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. Do you think the Reverend will be safe? Victor's men saw us at the church. Matthews is smart. He'll hide the crates, act innocent, claim he was just offering Christian charity to strangers. Elias shifted the rifle. Victor can't afford to make a move against a man of God without hard evidence. Too many people watching, too many questions. And what about us? How long do you think we have before they find this place? Not long enough. He looked at the children, already asleep despite the cold and fear. We need a better plan than just hiding. Victor's not going to stop. He can't. Those ledgers prove conspiracy, trafficking, murder. He'll hang if they see daylight in a courtroom. So he'll kill us first. He'll try. Lydia was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more resolved. I need to tell you something about Victor, about why he's so dangerous. I'm listening. Before my husband died, I heard him talking with Victor about someone they called the judge. At first, I thought they meant a real judge, someone in the legal system. But the way they talked about him, she shuddered. He wasn't just a contact. He was a partner. Someone high up with real power. Someone who could make problems disappear. Elias felt ice form in his stomach. You think Victor has a judge on his payroll? I think he has more than a judge. I think he has a network, lawmen, politicians, maybe even federal officials, men who profit from the suffering of others and protect each other when necessary. She met his eyes. That's why I ran instead of going to the authorities immediately. I didn't know who to trust. Still don't, except for you and maybe Reverend Matthews. The Marshall Thompson that Matthews mentioned could be part of it, or could be legitimate. I have no way of knowing. Lydia's hands twisted in her lap. That's what makes this so impossible. The very system that's supposed to protect people like those children is poisoned from the inside. Elias absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. If Victor had that kind of reach, that kind of protection, then no amount of evidence might be enough. The ledgers could disappear. Witnesses could recant or vanish. The whole thing could be buried deeper than any grave. We need to go public, he said suddenly. What? The ledgers, the evidence. We need to make copies, send them to newspapers, post them in public places. Make it so big that Victor's network can't contain it. He was thinking fast now, pieces clicking together. The Wyoming Tribune has been running stories about labor exploitation. If we could get the evidence to them, they're 300 miles away in Cheyenne. Then we send it by telegraph, or mail, or both. He stood, pacing now, the rifle dangling from one hand. We make this public before the marshal even arrives. Force Victor's hand. Make him react instead of plan. That's dangerous. If we go public and the wrong people see it first, it's all dangerous, Lydia. Hiding is dangerous. Running is dangerous. Trusting the system is dangerous. He stopped, looked at her. But doing nothing guarantees those children in the ledgers died for nothing. Guarantees others will follow them. At least if we go loud, we give them a chance. She considered this, weighing the risks. Outside, full dawn had arrived, pale and cold. Snow was starting to fall, light flakes that drifted more than fell. It would cover their tracks, which was good, but it would also make traveling harder, which wasn't. How would we even do it, she asked. We're trapped here. Victor's men are between us and any town big enough to have a telegraph office. Not trapped, just cornered. There's a difference. Elias moved back to the window, scanning the white landscape. We wait until dark, then move. There's a settlement called Timber Ridge about 12 miles east. Small place, but they have a telegraph. We could make it in 3 hours if we push. With 2 exhausted children and horses that can barely stand? You have a better idea? Lydia opened her mouth to respond, then froze. Her hand shot out, gripping Elias's arm with sudden, painful intensity. Listen. He did. At first he heard nothing but wind and the crackle of fire. Then it came, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving at a steady pace, coming closer. How many? Lydia whispered. Elias pressed himself against the wall, peering through a crack in the boards. He counted shapes emerging from the snow. 5, maybe 6. Spread out like they're searching. They found us. Not yet. They're still looking. He watched the riders fan out, checking abandoned structures, searching the landscape. They were methodical, professional. These weren't ranch hands playing at being tough. These were men who knew what they were doing. One of the riders stopped, dismounted, examined the ground. Even from a distance, Elias could see him pointing at something. Tracks, probably. The wagon had left deep ruts in the frozen earth, impossible to miss in daylight. The rider remounted and gestured to the others. They converged, forming a loose group, then started moving again, directly toward the homestead. "Wake the children," Elias said quietly. "Get them ready to move." Quietly. Lydia moved fast, crouching beside Thomas and Sarah, shaking them gently awake. The boy's eyes snapped open immediately, instantly alert. The girl took longer, confused and frightened. Lydia pressed a finger to her lips, and both children nodded, understanding. Elias kept watching the riders. They were close now, close enough that he could make out details. The led rider was older, 40 maybe, with a face carved from stone and eyes that promised violence. He carried a rifle across his saddle, relaxed but ready. The others looked younger, hungrier. Men who'd do terrible things for the right price. "Out the back," Elias whispered. "There's a gap in the wall. We can slip through, get to the barn, and—" The front door exploded inward. Not kicked open. Not broken. Exploded like something had hit it with massive force. The door flew off its hinges and crashed into the room, and through the opening strode a man who could only be Victor Hale. He was nothing like Elias had imagined, not some scarred villain or obvious monster. Victor Hale looked like a banker or a lawyer, well-dressed despite the weather, clean-shaven, with a face that belonged in church on Sunday morning. Only his eyes gave him away. They were the coldest eyes Elias had ever seen, empty of everything except calculation. "Lydia," Victor said, his voice smooth as silk. "There you are. We've been so worried." Behind him, 3 of the riders filed into the room, guns drawn. The others, Elias assumed, were covering the back exit. Trapped. They were completely trapped. "Victor." Lydia had positioned herself between the children and the door, her body a shield. "You shouldn't have come." "Shouldn't have?" Victor smiled, and it was like watching a snake bare its fangs. "My dear sister-in-law, you have something that belongs to me. Of course I came. Those ledgers don't belong to you. They're evidence of crimes, murders." Strong words. Difficult to prove. Victor's eyes slid to Elias, assessing him the way you'd assess a horse at auction. "And you must be the helpful rancher. Elias Branton, isn't it? I know all about you. Your brother's unfortunate death. Your fiancé's tragic end. You have my sympathies." The words were meant to wound, and they did. Elias felt rage bloom hot and bright in his chest, but he forced it down, kept his voice level. "Get out of here, Hale, while you still can." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Victor gestured at the men behind him. "I have 5 guns to your 1, and even if you manage to kill me, which you won't, my men would cut you down before you could work the bolt. Then they'd kill Lydia. Then those precious children she's protecting. Is that what you want?" "What do you want?" Lydia demanded. "I want my property returned. The ledgers, the maps, the correspondence. Everything you stole from my brother's office." Victor took a step closer, and Elias raised the Winchester slightly. Victor noticed but didn't stop. "Return them, and I'll let you live. You can raise those children somewhere far from here. Start over. I'm not unreasonable." "You're a liar. You'll kill us the moment you have those ledgers." "Perhaps. Perhaps not. But if you don't cooperate, I'll definitely kill you. The choice is yours." Victor's smile widened. "Where are they, Lydia? Where did you hide my property?" "They're not here." "Obviously. We've searched this delightful hovel, which means you've hidden them somewhere else. Town, probably. The question is where, and with whom?" His eyes narrowed. "The good Reverend, perhaps? Is that who you visited last night before my associates interrupted your evening?" Lydia said nothing, but Elias saw the flicker of fear cross her face. Victor saw it too. "Ah, yes. The Reverend." Victor turned to one of his men. "Send word to town. Have Matthews brought in for questioning. If he resists, be persuasive." "You can't touch him," Lydia said. "He's a man of God. People will mind their own business, as they always do. Or they'll be made to mind their business." "Really, Lydia? You've been gone from civilization too long. You've forgotten how the world works." Victor moved closer still, and now Elias could see the madness lurking behind those cold eyes. Power protects power. Money protects money, and I have both in abundance. You have blood on your hands, Elias said. His finger tightened on the Winchester's trigger, itching to end this. Those names in the ledgers, they were people, children. You destroyed them for profit. I provided opportunities for people who had none. If some couldn't handle the work, that's unfortunate but not my concern. Victor shrugged. The weak don't survive. That's simply nature. That's murder. That's business. And business requires certain unpleasant necessities. Which brings us to this moment. Victor stopped moving, just 5 feet from Elias now, close enough to see the texture of his expensive coat, the glint of gold cufflinks. Last chance, Lydia. Tell me where the evidence is and I'll make this quick. Painless, even. Refuse, and I'll start with the children. Make you watch. Make you beg. Then I'll kill you anyway and burn this place to the ground with your bodies inside. The room went silent except for the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind through broken walls. Elias could feel his heartbeat in his throat, fast and hard, could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him like physical mass. Thomas moved then, stepping forward despite Lydia's hand trying to hold him back. The boy's face was pale but determined, his voice steady. You won't hurt them, Thomas said, because if you do, everyone will know. Everyone will see what you are. Victor laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. And who's going to tell them, boy? You? You think anyone will believe a stolen child over a respected businessman? They'll believe the ledgers. They'll believe the evidence. Thomas stood straighter. You can kill us, but you can't kill the truth. It's already out there, already spreading. It was a bluff, and not a good one. But Victor's smile faltered slightly, and Elias saw the opening. The boy's right, Elias said, taking the gamble. Reverend Matthews didn't just hide the ledgers. He made copies, sent them to newspapers, to federal marshals, to territorial authorities. By now, dozens of people know what you've done. Killing us won't change that. You're lying, but Victor's voice had lost its certainty. Am I? You willing to bet your life on it? Elias raised the Winchester higher, aimed directly at Victor's chest. Because I'm willing to bet mine. I'll shoot you where you stand and your men will kill me, but those ledgers will still be out there. Your empire will still fall, and you'll be dead, unable to save yourself. The standoff stretched, tension thick enough to choke on. Victor's men shifted nervously, fingers twitching on triggers. Lydia held the children close, her body coiled to move, to fight, to do whatever was necessary. Then Victor did something unexpected. He laughed again, this time with genuine appreciation. You're good, he said to Elias. Better than I expected. That bluff almost worked. He took a step back, creating distance. But I know the Reverend hasn't sent anything anywhere. Know it because I have people watching the telegraph office, watching the post office, watching every route out of town. Nothing left Dry Creek last night except my men. Hunting you. The certainty in his voice made Elias's blood run cold. Victor wasn't guessing, he knew. So here's what's going to happen, Victor continued. You're going to tell me exactly where those ledgers are. Then you're going to write a confession, a suicide note really, explaining how you killed my dear brother when you discovered he was exposing your criminal activities. How you kidnapped these children and enlisted poor Lydia in your schemes. How consumed by guilt, you took your own life and theirs. No one will believe that. They will when I'm the one telling the story, when I'm the grieving brother seeking justice, when I have witnesses who saw you threaten people, saw you flee town like a guilty man. Victor's smile returned, cold and triumphant. I've already planted the seeds. By tonight, you'll be the villain in everyone's mind, and I'll be the hero who almost saved you. Elias felt the walls closing in, felt the trap tightening. Victor had planned this perfectly, anticipated every move. They had no cards left to play, no tricks up their sleeves. It was over. Then Sarah spoke, her small voice cutting through the tension like a bell. My mama taught me that bad men always lose in the end. She said good always wins, even when it looks like it won't. The 4-year-old looked up at Victor with eyes too old for her face. You're going to lose. I don't know how, but you will. Something in Victor's face changed. Not anger exactly, more like recognition. He stared at Sarah with an intensity that made Elias's skin crawl. Your mother, Victor said slowly. What was her name, child? Sarah pressed closer to Lydia, suddenly afraid. Lydia's arms tightened around her. Don't answer him, Lydia said. But Victor had already moved, crossing the distance between them in 2 quick steps. He grabbed Sarah's chin, forced her to look at him, studying her face like a book he was trying to read. The eyes, he murmured. I know those eyes. Sullivan. Margaret Sullivan. She had eyes like yours. Died 2 winters ago, supposedly of exposure. His grip tightened. But she didn't die, did she? She ran, found a new name, a new life, and then someone found her daughter, and Lydia moved faster than Elias thought possible. She ripped Sarah away from Victor and shoved him backward, placing herself between the man and the child. Her face was transformed by rage. All fear burned away. Don't you touch her, Lydia snarled. Don't you ever touch her again. Victor stumbled, caught himself, and his face went from curious to furious in an instant. He raised his hand to strike her, and that's when Elias made his choice. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester's report was deafening in the enclosed space. Victor went down hard, blood blooming from his shoulder where the bullet had caught him. His men shouted, raised their weapons, and Elias worked the bolt, chambered another round. Nobody move, he roared. Next shot goes through his head. The room froze. Victor was on the floor, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His face was white with shock and pain, but his eyes still held that terrible calculation. You just signed your death warrant, Victor hissed. Had it signed the moment I helped them. Elias kept the rifle trained on Victor's head, but his eyes tracked the men. Your boys have a choice now. They can walk away, live to see tomorrow, or they can die here protecting a man who'd throw them away like garbage the second it suited him. The men exchanged glances. One of them, the oldest, lowered his gun slightly. We didn't sign up for killing children, he said. Then don't, Elias replied. Walk away, all of you. Leave the guns, take the horses, and ride. I won't stop you. He'll kill you, one of the younger men said. Victor, when he recovers, he'll hunt you down. That's my problem, not yours. They hesitated, balanced on the knife edge of decision. Then the older man dropped his gun on the floor, turned, and walked out. After a moment, the others followed. Their footsteps echoed across the homestead, then faded. Horse sounds. Riding away. Silence. Elias kept the rifle aimed at Victor, who was sitting up now, still clutching his wounded shoulder. Blood had soaked through his expensive coat, turning the fabric dark and wet. This changes nothing, Victor said through gritted teeth. You think you've won? You've just made it worse. Those men will talk. Others will come. More men, better armed. You can't fight an army with one rifle and good intentions. Maybe not, but I can give those ledgers time to reach the right people. Can give Lydia and these children a chance to disappear. Elias moved closer, his voice dropping to something quiet and deadly. You're wrong about one thing, Hale. I didn't sign my death warrant today. I signed yours. Every second you're bleeding is a second closer to those ledgers reaching someone who can act on them. Every minute you spend hunting us is a minute you're not protecting yourself. You think you're a hero. Victor's laugh was wet, pained. You're just another fool who chose the wrong side. The side protecting children? That's never the wrong side. Lydia had gathered the children, was moving them toward the back exit. Elias, we need to go. Now. He knew she was right. Victor's men might return with reinforcements. Other riders might arrive. They'd bought themselves minutes, maybe an hour, no more. What do we do with him? Lydia asked, looking at Victor. It was tempting, God, it was tempting to put another bullet in him. End the threat. But Elias wasn't a murderer, no matter how much Victor deserved killing. Leave him, Elias said. He'll live or he won't. Either way, it's more mercy than he showed those children. They moved quickly, gathering supplies, heading for the barn. The horses were still exhausted, but fear would carry them a while longer. Had to. Behind them, Victor's voice followed. I'll find you, Branton. I'll find you and everyone you've ever cared about. You hear me? I'll burn your ranch to the ground. I'll salt the earth where you stood. His voice cut off as they closed the barn door, but the words hung in the air, poisonous and promising. Elias hitched the horses with shaking hands. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the hollow knowledge of what he'd done. He'd shot a man. Not killed him, but that was luck more than mercy. The bullet could have hit differently, could have severed something vital. "You did what you had to," Lydia said quietly, reading his face. "He was going to hurt Sarah." "I know." "Then don't regret it." "I don't. But that doesn't make it easier." They loaded everyone into the wagon. Children, supplies, the few possessions they'd brought from Elias's ranch that now felt like relics from another life. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that would cover their tracks, but also slow them down. Elias climbed onto the driver's bench, took up the reins. His arm ached where he'd been holding the rifle, and his shoulder throbbed from where Victor's door had nearly caught him. Everything hurt. Everything felt broken. But they were alive. For now, they were alive. "Which way?" Lydia asked. Elias looked at the landscape, at the roads that led in every direction. East to Timber Ridge and its telegraph. South, back toward Dry Creek and Reverend Matthews. North toward nothing but wilderness. West toward his ranch and everything he'd built. Every choice felt like surrender. Every direction led deeper into danger. "East," he said finally. "We get to that telegraph, send everything we know to every newspaper and marshal in the territory, make so much noise that Victor can't silence it all. And if we don't make it, then we don't, but at least we'll die trying to do something right." He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward into the snow and wind. Behind them, the homestead grew smaller, Victor's blood staining its floor. Ahead, 12 miles of frozen prairie and an uncertain future. Thomas moved up close to Elias, his young face grave. "That thing you said about not regretting protecting children, did you mean it?" "Every word." "Good." Thomas settled back, wrapping his arm around Sarah. "Because we're worth protecting, all of us, the ones in that wagon and the ones in those ledgers." "I know you are, son." The wagon rolled on through the storm, and Elias let himself believe it. That children were worth dying for, that standing against evil mattered, even when evil seemed unstoppable. That somewhere ahead, justice waited with arms open wide. He'd shot a man today. Would probably have to shoot more before this was over. Would probably die himself, bleeding out in the snow while Lydia and the children ran. But in that moment, with the wind howling and the snow falling and the weight of his choices pressing down like mountains, Elias Branton felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Purpose. He wasn't just existing anymore, wasn't just going through motions because that's what you did. He was fighting for something that mattered, protecting people who needed protecting. Standing between evil and innocence with nothing but an old rifle and a promise made in darkness. And that, he thought, as the storm swallowed them whole, was worth everything it would cost. The storm became their ally and their enemy in equal measure. It hid them from pursuing eyes, but turned every mile into an ordeal that tested the limits of endurance. The horses struggled through drifts that reached their knees, and the wagon wheels caught and stuck with maddening regularity. Each time they stopped to free the wagon, Elias scanned the white landscape behind them, searching for shapes that didn't belong, for movement that meant death was catching up. They'd been traveling for 3 hours when the wagon hit something hidden beneath the snow, a rock, a frozen rut, something solid enough to snap the front axle with a sound like a gunshot. The wagon lurched violently sideways, and Lydia threw herself over the children as supplies spilled across the snow. "Damn it," Elias breathed, climbing down to assess the damage. One look told him everything he needed to know. The axle was split clean through, irreparable, without tools they didn't have and time they couldn't spare. The wagon was finished. Lydia joined him, her face grim. "How bad?" "Bad as it gets. We'll have to go on foot or horseback from here. The children can't walk 12 miles in this storm." "I know." Elias looked at the 2 exhausted horses. They could carry riders, but not for long, not in these conditions. "We'll have to share. Put the children on one horse, you and me on the other. Switch off when they get too tired." "That'll slow us down even more." "You have a better idea. I'm all ears." She didn't. They worked quickly, salvaging what they could. Food, blankets, the rifle, ammunition, everything else had to stay. As Elias was repacking, his hand brushed against something in the wagon bed. The leather pouch. the gold coins. He pulled it out, felt its weight. Blood money, Lydia had called it, payment for suffering. But right now, it might buy them something more valuable than justice. It might buy them time. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Lydia's hands. "What? No, we can't. If something happens to me, you'll need money to get the children somewhere safe, to start over." He closed her fingers around the pouch. "Promise me you'll use it if you have to." "Elias, promise me." She met his eyes, and whatever she saw there made her nod. "I promise." They mounted up, Thomas and Sarah sharing one horse, Elias and Lydia on the other. The snow was falling so thick now that Elias could barely see 20 feet ahead. The world had become nothing but white. White ground, white sky, white air. If they got lost out here, they'd freeze to death before morning. But they couldn't stop, couldn't go back, could only push forward and hope the storm ended before they did. They rode in silence, the only sounds the crunch of hooves in snow and the wind's constant howl. After an hour, they switched, Elias taking Sarah on his horse, Lydia riding with Thomas. The girl was shivering despite the blankets wrapped around her, her lips tinged blue. "Tell me a story," Sarah whispered against Elias's chest. "Please, like Lydia does." "I don't know any stories, sweetheart." "Then tell me about your ranch, about the animals, about anything that's not cold." So Elias talked, his voice rough but steady, painting pictures of summer days and warm earth, of cattle grazing in green pastures and horses running free. He talked about his mother's garden, about the way wildflowers covered the hills in spring, about the time a calf was born during a lightning storm, and they named him Thunder. He talked until his throat was raw and Sarah's shivering eased, until her breathing deepened and he realized she'd fallen asleep against him. "Thank you," Lydia said quietly from the other horse. "For what?" "For giving her something besides fear to hold on to." They rode on as darkness fell, turning the white world gray and then black. Elias had been navigating by instinct and memory, following what he thought was the Eastern Trail. But in the storm, with no landmarks visible, he couldn't be certain. They might be heading toward Timber Ridge, or they might be circling back toward Dry Creek, or they might be riding into empty wilderness where no one would find their bodies until spring thaw. It was Thomas who spotted the light first. "There," the boy said, pointing into the darkness. "I see something." "A light." Elias squinted, saw nothing at first, then a flicker, small, distant, but definitely there. A lamp or fire, sign of human habitation. "Could be a trap," Lydia warned. "Victor's men could have circled ahead." "Could be, or could be shelter and help." Elias weighed the options. "Either way, we can't stay out here much longer. The children won't survive the night in this cold." They approached the light cautiously, Elias keeping one hand on the rifle. As they got closer, a structure emerged from the snow. Not a house, but a way station, one of the small stops that dotted the trail for travelers caught between towns. Smoke rose from a chimney, and light glowed in the windows. Someone was home. Elias dismounted, helped the others down. His legs nearly buckled. He'd been riding for so long that they'd forgotten how to support his weight. He steadied himself against the horse, then moved toward the door. Before he could knock, it opened. A man stood in the doorway, 60s maybe, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen enough of life to be surprised by very little. "Thought I heard horses," the man said. His gaze traveled over them, the exhausted children, the frightened woman, the armed man. "Storm's no place for traveling. Come in." They didn't argue. The warmth inside hit Elias like a physical blow, so intense after the cold that it actually hurt. The way station was simple. One large room with a fireplace, a table, some chairs, and beds built into the walls. Basic, but it was paradise compared to the frozen hell outside. "Name's Marcus Webb," the man said, closing the door behind them. "Run this station for travelers. Don't get many visitors this time of year, especially in weather like this." He moved to the fire, added wood. "You folks look like you've had a rough go of it." "You could say that," Elias replied carefully. He still didn't know if they could trust this man. "We're heading east, Timber Ridge." "Long way to go in a blizzard, longer still with children." Marcus looked at Thomas and Sarah, his expression softening. "Get them by the fire. I'll make something hot to drink." As Marcus busied himself with a pot and supplies, Elias caught Lydia's eye. She nodded slightly. She felt it too. This man seemed genuine, but they'd been fooled before. Marcus brought them coffee and something that might have been soup or might have been stew, but was hot, and that's all that mattered. The children ate like they'd been starving, which Elias realized they probably had been. None of them had eaten properly since leaving his ranch. "So," Marcus said, settling into a chair, "you gonna tell me what you're really running from? Because folks don't risk their lives in a blizzard unless they're running from something worse than weather." Elias considered lying, considered a dozen different stories, but the exhaustion and the warmth and the knowledge that they were probably going to die anyway made him tell the truth. "We're running from a man named Victor Hale. He runs a trafficking operation, women and children. We have evidence of his crimes, and he wants us dead before we can deliver it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, "Victor Hale. Heard that name before. Rich family, lots of influence. You're taking on someone powerful." "I know." "You understand what that means? The kind of resources he can bring to bear?" "I shot him this morning, left him bleeding in an abandoned homestead, so yes, I understand." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "You shot Victor Hale?" "In the shoulder. He'll live, unfortunately. That man has connections all the way to the territorial governor. You know that, right? He's not just some local troublemaker. He's protected at the highest levels." "All the more reason to expose him," Lydia said. Her voice was steady, resolved. "Men like that only stay in power because good people are too afraid to stand against them." Marcus studied her, then Elias, then the children. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him because he nodded slowly. "You said you have evidence? Ledgers, maps, letters, proof of dozens of crimes over years. We left it with Reverend Matthews in Dry Creek." Elias leaned forward. "We're trying to reach Timber Ridge, get to the telegraph office. Send the information to every newspaper and marshal we can think of. Make it too big for Victor to bury." "That's a good plan. Would have been a better plan 3 days ago." Marcus poured himself coffee. "Victor's probably already moving to protect himself, calling in favors, pressuring people, maybe even preparing to disappear if necessary." "So you think we've already lost?" "I think you're up against a system designed to protect men like him. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try." Marcus stood, moved to a cabinet, and pulled out a map. He spread it on the table, pointing. "Timber Ridge is here. You're here. That's still about 8 miles in good weather. In this storm, it'll take you all day tomorrow, assuming you don't freeze first." "We don't have all day. Victor's men could be doing a lot of things, but they're not traveling in this storm any more than you are. Nobody is. Weather like this, even the desperate find shelter and wait it out." Marcus tapped the map. "So here's what you do. You stay here tonight, rest, feed those children properly, let them sleep somewhere warm for once. In the morning, if the storm's passed, I'll take you to Timber Ridge myself." "Why would you do that?" Elias asked. "Because 30 years ago, I had a daughter, sweet girl, bright as summer. When she was 16, a man not unlike Victor Hale promised her work in the city, promised education and opportunity. I was a fool and believed him, never saw her again." Marcus's voice went flat. "Found out years later she'd died in a work camp, worn out and thrown away like trash. I've been running this station ever since, hoping maybe I could help someone else's daughter make it home. Haven't had much luck until now." The room fell silent except for the crackle of fire and the howl of wind outside. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. They weren't alone anymore. This man, this stranger, understood what they were fighting for. "We'd be grateful," Lydia said softly. "More grateful than we can express." "Then it's settled. You folks get some rest. I'll keep watch. If anyone comes, and I doubt they will, I'll wake you." They didn't argue. The exhaustion had become so complete, so total, that even fear couldn't keep them awake anymore. Lydia settled the children in one of the wall beds, tucking blankets around them with a tenderness that made Elias's throat tight. Thomas tried to stay awake, tried to maintain his vigilance, but his eyes closed despite his best efforts. Sarah was already deep asleep, one hand clutching the doll she'd carried all this way. Elias moved to take up position by the window, but Marcus stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Sleep, son. You're no good to anyone dead on your feet. I've got this." I don't know if I can. Every time I close my eyes, I see Victor's face, hear his threats. That's the cost of standing up. The weight of it stays with you. Marcus settled into the chair by the window, rifle across his lap. But you carry it anyway, because the alternative is worse. Now sleep. That's an order. Elias wanted to argue, but his body made the decision for him. He found a chair in the corner, positioned where he could see both doors, and let himself sink into it. Just for a moment, he told himself. Just long enough to rest his eyes. He was asleep in seconds. When he woke, pale light was filtering through the windows and the storm had passed. The world outside was transformed, white and pristine, and deadly beautiful. Elias sat up, every muscle screaming protest. Across the room, Lydia was awake too, sitting by the children's bed and watching them sleep with an expression that was equal parts love and fear. Marcus was at the stove cooking something that smelled impossibly good. "Morning. Storm broke about an hour ago. Horses are fed and rested. We can leave within the hour if you're ready." "You're really coming with us?" Elias asked. "Said I would, didn't I?" Marcus didn't turn from the stove. "Besides, you'll need someone who knows the territory. These trails can be tricky after a storm." They ate quickly, eggs and bread and coffee that was better than anything Elias had tasted in years. The children were quiet but alert, sensing that today was important. Today would determine everything. As they were preparing to leave, Thomas pulled Elias aside. The boy's face was serious, older than his 8 years. "If something happens," Thomas said, "if they catch us, you make sure Sarah gets away. Promise me." "Nothing's going to happen." "Promise me anyway." Elias crouched down until he was eye level with the boy. "I promise." "But Thomas, I need you to promise me something too. If we do get separated, if things go wrong, you don't stop. You keep Sarah moving, keep her safe. You find good people and you tell them everything. You make sure those names in the ledgers aren't forgotten. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I can do that." "Good boy." They rode out as the sun climbed higher, Marcus leading the way on his own horse. The snow made the going slow but not impossible, and Marcus knew every shortcut, every safe path. They made better time than Elias had hoped, but they'd only traveled 3 miles when Marcus suddenly pulled up short, his hand raised in warning. "What is it?" Elias asked. "Riders, coming from the east, 4, maybe 5. Marcus pointed, and Elias saw them, dark shapes against the white landscape, moving fast. "They're between us and Timber Ridge. Victor's men? Maybe. Or maybe just travelers, but we can't risk it." Marcus looked around, assessing the terrain. "There's a ravine about a half-mile south. We can hide there, wait for them to pass." They turned off the trail, pushing the horses harder now. Behind them, the riders were getting closer, their shouts carrying on the cold air. They'd been spotted. "Go!" Marcus yelled. "I'll slow them down!" "No!" But Marcus was already turning his horse, riding back toward the approaching riders. Elias watched in horror as the old man positioned himself between the hunters and the hunted, buying them precious seconds with his own life. "Elias, we have to move!" Lydia's voice cut through his shock. He snapped the reins, and they raced toward the ravine. Behind them, he heard gunshots, shouting, then silence that was somehow worse. They reached the ravine and plunged down into it, the horses sliding on the steep slope. At the bottom, hidden by snow-covered rocks and dead brush, they dismounted and waited. Elias had the rifle ready, his hands steady despite the rage and grief churning in his gut. Minutes passed. Then hoofbeats above on the rim of the ravine, voices. "Lost them. Could have gone any direction from here. Victor wants them found. Keep searching. Storms made tracking impossible. They could be anywhere. Then we search everywhere. Split up. Whoever finds them gets double payment." The voices faded as the riders moved off in different directions. Elias waited another 5 minutes, then another 5, making sure they were truly alone. "Marcus," Sarah whispered. "Is he—" "He saved us," Lydia said, her voice thick. "He was a brave man." They couldn't stay in the ravine, couldn't hide forever. Elias made a decision that felt like surrender but was actually defiance. "We don't go to Timber Ridge," he said. "They'll have men watching it now, watching every telegraph office, every way out." "Then what do we do?" Lydia asked. "We go back to Dry Creek, back to Reverend Matthews and those ledgers." Elias was thinking fast now, pieces falling into place. "We don't send the information. We make them public ourselves. Post them in the church. Read them from the pulpit. Make it so that everyone in town knows, everyone sees. Make it impossible to ignore." "That's insane. Victor's men are in Dry Creek." "Exactly. They're expecting us to run. So we do the last thing they'd expect. We walk right back into the lion's den, and we tell the truth loud enough that everyone has to listen." Thomas spoke up, his voice clear. "It'll work. If enough people know, if everyone sees the evidence at once, Victor can't silence them all. He can't kill a whole town." "He could try," Lydia said. But there was something in her voice now, not hope exactly, but possibility. They talked it through, planned as best they could. It was risky. More than risky. It was potentially suicidal, but it was also the only option they had left. As they were preparing to move, Sarah tugged on Elias's sleeve. "Will we be safe after, when this is over?" He wanted to lie. Wanted to promise her everything would be fine, but he'd promised himself honesty, and that promise still stood. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll try our best to make sure you are." "That's enough," she said simply. "Trying is enough." They climbed out of the ravine and turned west, back toward Dry Creek and whatever waited there. The sun was high now, turning the snow into a blinding white field that hurt to look at. Behind them, somewhere in that vast emptiness, Marcus's body was cooling in the snow. Another good man dead because evil men couldn't bear to lose their power. But his death wouldn't be meaningless. None of their deaths would be, if they could just make it to Dry Creek. If they could just survive long enough to tell the truth. They rode for hours, avoiding the main trail, sticking to rough country where horses could barely pass. It was slow, exhausting work, but it kept them hidden. By late afternoon, the town appeared on the horizon, small, ordinary, deadly. "We wait until dark," Elias said. "Then we go in fast, straight to the church. If Matthews still has the ledgers, we make our stand there. If not—" He didn't finish the thought. They found shelter in an abandoned barn on the edge of town and waited as the sun set. In the growing darkness, Elias checked the rifle one more time, counted his remaining ammunition. Not enough for a sustained fight. Just enough for a last stand if it came to that. Lydia was helping the children prepare, her movements efficient despite the fear Elias could see in her eyes. When she caught him watching, she came over, stood close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Whatever happens tonight," she said quietly, "I want you to know that you gave us something we'd lost. Hope. The belief that good people still exist." "Lydia, let me finish." She put her hand on his arm. "You didn't have to help us. Could have turned us away, lived your quiet life, stayed safe. But you didn't. You chose to stand. And that choice," her voice cracked, "that choice saved us in ways you can't even understand. I couldn't live with myself if I'd done anything else. I know. That's what makes you different. That's what makes this worth it." She reached up, kissed him, soft and quick and full of things they didn't have time to say. "For luck." "For luck," he echoed. As full darkness fell, they mounted up one last time. The horses were beyond exhausted, running on nothing but will. Same as their riders. They entered Dry Creek from the north, moving through shadows and back alleys. The town was quiet, most people already in their homes for the night. Light glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys. Everything looked normal, peaceful. It was an illusion that would shatter soon. The church loomed ahead, its white walls ghostly in the moonlight. Elias could see light in the windows. Matthews was there. They'd made it. They dismounted in the shadows beside the church, tied the horses where they could bolt if needed. Elias went first, rifle ready, checking the corners in darkness. When he was sure it was clear, he gestured for the others to follow. The side door was unlocked. They slipped inside into the familiar warmth of the Reverend's study. Matthews looked up from his desk, his face transforming from surprise to relief to fear in rapid succession. "Dear God, I thought you were dead. Victor's men have been everywhere asking questions, making threats. I told them nothing, but—" He stopped, really seeing them now. "You came back. Why would you come back?" "Because running isn't working," Elias said. "We need those ledgers, all of them, and we need your church." "For what?" Lydia stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "To tell the truth, to show this town what Victor Hale really is, to give those names in the ledgers the justice they deserve." Matthews stared at her, then at Elias, then at the children standing brave and terrified in his study. Something changed in his face, a decision being made, a line being crossed. "The ledgers are hidden in the cellar, wrapped in oilcloth, buried under the floorboards. I'll get them." He stood, moved toward a door, then stopped, turned back. "This will destroy him, you know. If we do this right, if we make enough noise, Victor Hale will hang. But he won't go quiet. He'll fight. People will die." "People are already dying," Thomas said. His young voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room go still. "They've been dying for years. Maybe it's time the right people started dying instead." The Reverend nodded slowly. "Then let's bring the truth into the light." He descended into the cellar, and they heard him moving things, prying up boards. When he emerged, he carried 3 familiar crates, their contents now wrapped in protection against the damp. Elias helped him set them on the desk, and together they began pulling out the ledgers, the maps, the letters, evidence of dozens of crimes, hundreds of victims. The weight of it all, laid out on a desk in a small church in a small town that was about to become the center of something much larger than itself. "Tomorrow morning," Matthews said, "Sunday service. The church will be full. Half the town comes to hear me preach. We'll give them something to hear." "Victor will try to stop us before then," Lydia warned. "Let him try. These are sacred grounds. Even he won't violate sanctuary, not publicly at least." The Reverend looked at each of them in turn. "Get some rest, all of you. Tomorrow we change everything." They settled in the church's back rooms, places meant for visiting clergy but serving now as a fortress against the darkness outside. Elias took first watch, positioning himself where he could see both the main entrance and the side door. The rifle lay across his knees, and the weight of everything they'd survived pressed down on his shoulders like accumulated snow. Outside, Dry Creek slept, unaware that morning would bring revelation, justice, and probably blood. Somewhere in that sleeping town, Victor Hale was making his own plans, calling his own allies, preparing for war. But in the church, surrounded by holy symbols and the evidence of unholy crimes, 4 refugees and 1 reverend held the line. Tomorrow they would speak truth to power. Tomorrow they would give voice to the voiceless. Tomorrow they would stand in the light and dare the darkness to come for them. And if tomorrow brought death, at least it would be death with purpose, death with meaning, death that mattered. Elias closed his eyes briefly, allowed himself one moment of peace. When he opened them, Lydia was standing beside him, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You could still walk away, take the horses, ride for your ranch. I'd understand." "I know you would. That's why I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, unsurprised. They stood together in the darkness, keeping watch over sleeping children and dangerous truths, waiting for the dawn that would change everything. The night stretched on, cold and infinite, and in those dark hours before morning, Elias thought about Rebecca and Daniel, about Marcus and all the names in the ledgers, about every person who died because evil went unchallenged. Tomorrow, he thought, would be for them. Tomorrow would be their justice, their vindication, their voice finally heard. Tomorrow, the truth would burn bright enough to drive back even the deepest darkness. He just had to survive long enough to see it. Dawn came soft and gold, painting the church windows with light that seemed almost holy. Elias had stayed awake through the entire night, his body running on something beyond exhaustion, on purpose, on the knowledge that this day would either vindicate everything they'd suffered or render it meaningless. He watched the town wake up through the window, saw lamps being lit, smoke beginning to rise from chimneys, people emerging to begin their Sunday routines. Normal life about to be shattered. Reverend Matthews was already moving through the church, preparing for service with a methodical calm that Elias envied. The ledgers were arranged on a table near the pulpit, covered with a cloth but ready. Evidence waiting to be revealed. Truth waiting to be spoken. Lydia emerged from the back room with the children, all of them looking more rested than they had in days, but still carrying that edge of fear that had become their constant companion. Sarah held tight to Lydia's hand, and Thomas walked with his shoulders back, ready for whatever came next. "People will start arriving in an hour," Matthew said, adjusting his collar. "The church fills up by 9. We'll have maybe 100 people, maybe more. Half the town." "And Victor?" Elias asked. "If he's smart, he'll stay away. Coming here would be an admission that he has something to fear, but Victor's not known for restraint when he's cornered." The Reverend met Elias's eyes. "You should be armed, just in case." "Already am." Elias patted the revolver at his hip. The rifle was propped near the pulpit, hidden but accessible. "If he brings men, then we deal with it. But we do this regardless. The truth gets told today, no matter what it costs." They waited as the hour passed, tension building with each minute. At 8:30, the first parishioners began arriving, families dressed in their Sunday best, farmers scrubbed clean, children running ahead of their parents. Normal people living normal lives, about to learn that monsters lived among them. Elias positioned himself near the back, where he could watch the door and the congregation. Lydia sat with the children in the front pew, visible to everyone, her presence itself a statement. These were the people Victor had hunted. These were the witnesses who refused to be silenced. By 9, the church was full. Bodies packed the pews, standing room only at the back. The air was thick with the smell of wool and wood smoke and anticipation. People were murmuring, curious about the woman and children in the front row, about the covered table near the pulpit. Something was different today. They could feel it. Reverend Matthews stepped up to the pulpit, and the murmuring quieted. He looked out over his congregation with eyes that had seen too much and understood the weight of what he was about to do. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed church, "today I must break with tradition. Today's sermon will not come from Scripture, though what I have to tell you concerns the very nature of good and evil, of justice and judgment." A stirring in the crowd. Confused glances. Matthews continued. 5 days ago, a woman came to this church seeking sanctuary. She came with 2 children and evidence of crimes so terrible that I confess I wept when I first saw them, evidence that implicates one of our own community's most prominent citizens in trafficking, forced labor, and murder. The church erupted, voices raised in shock and disbelief, people turning to their neighbors, demanding explanations. Matthews raised his hand for silence. "I know what you're thinking, that I've lost my mind, that this must be some mistake, but I ask you to look at that woman there." He pointed to Lydia. "Her name is Lydia Hale. She is the widow of James Hale and sister-in-law to Victor Hale, and she has brought testimony that will shake this town to its foundations." The doors at the back of the church burst open. Victor Hale strode in, flanked by 4 men Elias recognized from the homestead. Victor's arm was in a sling, his shoulder bandaged beneath his expensive coat, but his face was composed, almost amused. He looked like a man who'd arrived to watch a particularly entertaining performance. "Reverend Matthews," Victor called out, his voice smooth as ever. "I apologize for the interruption, but I think this congregation deserves to know the truth before you poison their minds with lies and fabrications." "Then by all means, Mr. Hale, stay and hear the truth." Matthews gestured to an empty pew. "I welcome your presence. In fact, I insist on it." Victor's smile faltered slightly, but he moved forward, his men staying near the doors. The congregation parted like water, people shrinking back from him as if his presence carried contagion. He settled into a pew near the middle, looking relaxed despite the tension crackling through the air. "Now then," Matthews continued, "let me show you what Mrs. Hale brought to me." He pulled the cloth off the table, revealing the ledgers, maps, and letters. Even from the back, Elias could see people leaning forward, trying to see what they contained. "These are business records," Matthews said. "Meticulously kept accounts of a trafficking operation that has been running for at least 8 years. An operation that took vulnerable women and children, orphans, immigrants, widows with nowhere else to turn, and sold them to farms and work camps across the territory. Sold them knowing they would be worked to death, abused, discarded like animals. Those are forgeries, Victor said calmly. Fabrications created by a disturbed woman seeking revenge against her husband's family. Reverend, surely you can see you're being manipulated. These bear your brother's handwriting, Matthews cut him off. Authenticated by 3 different people who knew James Hale. They bear your signature as well, Mr. Hale, on contracts and correspondence. Your name appears hundreds of times in these documents. Then they're very good forgeries. Victor stood, playing to the crowd now. Friends, neighbors, you've known me for years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my character? Have I ever been anything but a benefactor to this community? You donated to the church building fund, someone called out. You helped my farm through a hard winter, another voice added. Yes, Victor said, spreading his hands. I've done my best to be a good neighbor, a good citizen, and now I'm being slandered by a woman who murdered my brother and has apparently enlisted a drifter, he pointed at Elias, to help her destroy my reputation. The mood in the church was shifting. Elias could feel it, could see doubt creeping into faces that had been shocked moments before. Victor was good at this. Years of practice lying and manipulating, of using his money and position to shape perception. He was winning. Then Lydia stood up. My name is Lydia Hale, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. And yes, I killed my husband. Killed him with a cast iron skillet when I found him beating this boy. She put her hand on Thomas's shoulder, for being too sick to work. Killed him because he was going to murder a child, and I chose to save a life instead of protecting a monster. The church went absolutely silent. The sheriff in my town called it self-defense, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because after James died, I found his office, found these ledgers, found names of people who'd been taken, used, destroyed, and I couldn't let it continue. I couldn't let these crimes stay hidden. She's lying, Victor said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Thomas, Lydia said softly, tell them your story. The boy stood, small and scared but determined. His voice shook at first, then grew stronger. My name is Thomas Sullivan. 5 years ago, men came to my mother and said they could give me education, opportunity, said I'd learn a trade. My mama didn't want to let me go, but we were poor and she thought, his voice cracked. She thought it was my best chance. Instead, they took me to a work camp, made me break rocks 12 hours a day, beat me when I was too slow. Other boys died there. I watched them die and get buried in unmarked graves. A woman in the congregation gasped. Others were crying now, hands over their mouths. My mama wrote letters, Thomas continued, dozens of them, asking where I was, begging for information. Those letters are in that pile. Every single one went unanswered because Victor Hale and his brother made more money keeping me working than they would have made sending me home. The boy is mistaken, Victor tried. Traumatized by whatever happened to him, certainly, but mistaken about who was responsible. Sarah, Lydia said, your turn, sweetheart. The 4-year-old stood on the pew so people could see her. When she spoke, her voice was small but steady. The bad woman hurt me, hurt lots of children. When I cried, she locked me in the dark. When I wouldn't talk, she said I was broken and useless. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept going. Then Lydia came and took me away. She promised the bad woman couldn't hurt me anymore. But the bad man, Victor, he wants to take me back. He wants to make Lydia stop talking about all the hurt children. The church was full of weeping now. Mothers clutching their children, fathers with fists clenched and faces hard. The tide was turning, shifting away from Victor and toward the truth standing before them. Victor felt it too. His composure cracked, just for a moment, and Elias saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him weighing options, planning his next move. Enough of this circus, Victor said, standing. I don't have to listen to coached children reciting lies. I'll address these accusations through proper legal channels, in a courtroom where evidence can be properly examined and... There won't be a courtroom for you, a new voice said. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall and weathered, with a silver star pinned to his chest. Marshall Thompson. He'd arrived. Victor Hale, Thompson said, walking down the aisle with purpose. I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking, and accessory to murder. You have the right to... You can't arrest me, Victor snarled, all pretense of civility gone now. I have friends, powerful friends. One telegram from me and your career is over, Thompson. You'll be investigating livestock theft in Montana for the rest of your miserable life. Maybe, but right now you're under arrest. Thompson pulled out handcuffs. Your choice how this goes, easy or hard. Victor's men moved forward, hands on their guns. The congregation shrank back, people grabbing children and diving for cover. Elias had the revolver out before he'd consciously decided to draw it, and suddenly the church was full of armed men on a hair trigger. Nobody has to die here, Elias said, his voice cutting through the tension. You boys have a choice. You can go down with Victor, or you can walk away. Live to see tomorrow, have families, have futures. Or you can die in a church defending a man who saw you as nothing but tools. The men hesitated, looking at Victor, at the marshal, at the guns pointed in every direction. I'll triple your pay, Victor said desperately. Whatever he's offering, I'll triple it. Just get me out of here. He's offering us our souls back, one of the men said. He was young, couldn't have been more than 20, with eyes that had seen too much too fast. That's worth more than your money, Mr. Hale. He dropped his gun. The others followed, one by one, until Victor stood alone and the marshal was advancing with handcuffs. You can't do this, Victor said, backing away. I have rights. I have connections. I'll destroy every one of you. You already tried, Lydia said, and you failed. The marshal cuffed him, and Victor's struggles turned from defiant to desperate. He was shouting now, making threats and promises in equal measure, but no one was listening anymore. The congregation watched in stunned silence as he was led away, this man they'd thought they knew, this monster who'd hidden in plain sight. When the church doors closed behind him, the silence stretched for a long moment. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, then another, then the whole church erupted in applause and cheering. People were embracing, crying, shouting prayers of thanksgiving. Reverend Matthews raised his hands for quiet, and gradually the noise subsided. Today we've witnessed truth triumph over deception, he said. But the work isn't finished. There are names in those ledgers, hundreds of them. People who are still out there, still suffering, still waiting for someone to care. We must find them. We must bring them home. We must ensure that what happened to Thomas and Sarah and so many others never happens again. How? Someone called out. What can we do? We start by making noise. We contact every newspaper, every territorial authority, every church and civic organization we can find. We make this story so big that it can't be ignored. We force the system to care. Matthews looked at Lydia. And we support the brave souls who risked everything to bring this truth to light. The congregation surged forward then, people wanting to shake Lydia's hand, to hug the children, to thank Elias for his protection. It was overwhelming, this sudden shift from hunted to celebrated. Elias found himself backed against a wall, accepting thanks from people he'd never met, being called a hero when he'd only done what seemed necessary. It was Thomas who found him in the crowd, pulled him aside. Is it really over? The boy asked. Victor's arrested. The evidence is public, so yeah, I think it's really over. And we're safe now? Sarah and me? Elias crouched down, looked the boy in the eyes. You're safe. You have my word. What happens to us now? It was a question Elias had been avoiding, not wanting to think about the moment when Lydia and the children would leave, would move on to whatever came next. The thought of the ranch empty again, of returning to that quiet, solitary life, felt suddenly unbearable. That's up to Lydia, he said. But whatever happens, you'll be taken care of. I'll make sure of it. The crowd eventually dispersed, people heading home to process what they'd witnessed, to spread the news to those who'd missed the service. By noon, the church was quiet again, just Elias, Lydia, the children, and Reverend Matthews. The marshal wants statements from all of you, Matthews said, and there will be a trial. Victor will fight this with everything he has, every legal trick and delay. It could take months. We'll be here, Lydia said, for as long as it takes. Where will you stay? I can arrange for... They'll stay at my ranch, Elias said. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew they were right. It's quiet, it's safe, and there's room. Lydia looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Elias, We can't impose on you forever. It's not an imposition, He struggled for words. It's what needs to happen. They gathered their few possessions and walked to where the horses waited. The town looked different now in the afternoon light, less threatening, more like a place where justice might actually exist. People nodded to them as they passed, offered words of encouragement and support. The story was spreading fast. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, everyone too exhausted for conversation. But it was a different kind of quiet than before, not the silence of fear and desperation, but the peaceful quiet of people who'd survived something terrible together and come out the other side. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun started its descent, the house and barn solid and real and welcoming. Elias felt something in his chest loosen, tension he'd been carrying for days finally releasing. They were home. Somehow, impossibly, they'd made it home. Over the following days, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Thomas helped with the ranch work, eager to learn and surprisingly capable. Sarah followed Lydia everywhere, slowly learning to play again, to laugh without fear. And Lydia herself transformed before Elias's eyes, the hardness fading from her face, the constant vigilance easing into something closer to peace. The trial preparations continued. Marshal Thompson visited several times, taking statements, gathering evidence. He told them that Victor's network was unraveling fast, other arrests being made, other victims coming forward. The judge who'd been on Victor's payroll had resigned in disgrace. Politicians were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. "You started something big," Thompson told them during one visit. "Bigger than any of us realized. There are calls for a territorial investigation into labor practices, into the placement system. Real reform might actually happen." "And Victor?" Elias asked. "He'll hang, no question. Too much evidence, too many witnesses. His lawyers are trying to bargain, but there's nothing to bargain with. He's finished." 3 months after that Sunday morning in the church, the trial began. It lasted 2 weeks and drew crowds from across the territory. Newspapers sent reporters, artists sketched the proceedings. Every day the courtroom was packed with people wanting to witness justice being done. Lydia testified for 6 hours, laying out everything she'd discovered, everything she'd endured. Her voice never wavered. Thomas and Sarah testified too, their words carrying a weight that no legal argument could counter. Other victims came forward, women who'd escaped the work camps, families who'd lost daughters and sons. The prosecution presented ledger after ledger, letter after letter, building a case so overwhelming that even Victor's expensive lawyers couldn't find cracks in it. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Victor showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead as the judge sentenced him to death by hanging. Justice, finally served. Elias stood in the back of the courtroom, watching it all unfold, and felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Not quite happiness, the cost had been too high for that, but satisfaction. The sense that his brother and Rebecca and Marcus and all the names in those ledgers had been heard, had been honored, had mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Lydia, shouting questions. She handled them with grace, giving credit to the reverend, to the marshal, to everyone except herself. When they asked about her plans, she simply said she was going home. That evening, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset over the Wyoming prairie. Spring had arrived while they'd been occupied with trials and testimony, and the land was coming alive again, green grass pushing through dead brown, wildflowers beginning to bloom, birds returning from their winter journeys. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. He'd grown in 3 months, was starting to lose that haunted look that had defined him when they first met. "Now we live," Lydia said. "We build something good out of all this pain. We remember the people who didn't make it, and we honor them by living fully." "But where?" Sarah asked. "Where will we live?" It was the question Elias had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. He'd been thinking about it for weeks, rehearsing different ways to say what needed to be said. In the end, he just spoke plainly. "You could stay here. All of you, permanently." He looked at Lydia. "I know you promised to come back home, and you did. You kept your word. But if you wanted to stay, to make this your home, I'd—" He stopped, started again. "I'd be honored to have you." Lydia was quiet for a long moment, and Elias felt his heart sink. He'd overstepped, assumed too much. let his own loneliness cloud his judgment. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You remember the first thing I asked you?" she said. "That night in your barn? You asked if I could take you to town, and you said only if I promised to come back home. At the time, I thought you were crazy, thought you were just some lonely rancher making conditions because you could." She moved closer to him, took his hand. "But you weren't talking about coming back to your house, were you? You were talking about coming back to you, to this, to the possibility of family and safety and belonging." "Maybe I was. Didn't fully understand it myself at the time. Well, I understand it now." She looked at the children, then back at Elias. "We'd like to stay. If the offer's still open." "It is. It always will be." Thomas whooped and ran into the yard, doing cartwheels in the grass. Sarah laughed and chased after him, both of them transformed from the silent, scared children who'd first appeared in Elias's barn. Watching them, Elias felt something he'd thought died with Rebecca and Daniel: hope for the future, belief in tomorrow. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new life. Elias filed papers making him the legal guardian of Thomas and Sarah, a process that went through without challenge. The children had no other family, and the courts recognized that Lydia and Elias had saved them. More than that, had given them a chance at the childhood that had been stolen. Lydia planted wildflowers around the porch, just as she'd dreamed during those dark days of running and hiding. They bloomed in waves of color, purple and yellow and red, transforming the ranch from a place of solitary survival into something that looked like home. One warm afternoon in May, Elias was repairing the barn roof when he heard a wagon approaching. He climbed down, wary out of habit, then relaxed when he saw Reverend Matthews at the reins. "Reverend, didn't expect to see you out this way." "Had some business to discuss." Matthews climbed down, looking pleased with himself. "Just came from the territorial capital. Thought you should know. The governor signed a new law today. Makes trafficking and forced labor a capital crime. Mandates inspections of all work camps and placement houses. They're calling it the Hale Act." "Named after Victor?" "Named after the victims. Named after the courage it took to bring the truth to light." Matthews pulled out a newspaper. "You're famous, by the way. All of you. The story's been picked up by papers as far away as New York and San Francisco." Elias took the paper, saw his own name in print alongside Lydia's and the children's. The headline read, "Justice Served, Wyoming Trafficking Ring Exposed by Widow's Courage." "I don't feel like a hero," Elias said. "Good heroes rarely do. They just do what's necessary and hope it's enough." Matthews looked around the ranch at the flowers and the repaired fences and the children playing in the yard. "You've built something good here, something that matters. We all did. You included. Perhaps. But you're the one who took strangers into your barn in the middle of the night and chose to stand with them no matter the cost. That takes a special kind of courage." Matthews extended his hand. "I'm proud to know you, Elias Branton." They shook hands, and Matthews left shortly after, his wagon disappearing down the trail in a cloud of dust. Elias stood there for a while, holding the newspaper, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. That evening, after dinner, Lydia found him on the porch. The children were inside reading by lamplight. It was just the two of them and the vast Wyoming sky overhead. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing us as people worth saving, for not turning us away when you had every reason to." She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You gave us more than shelter, Elias. You gave us back our humanity. You never lost it. You just needed someone to remind you it was there. Maybe, or maybe we reminded each other." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that as the stars came out one by one. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "That first night when you said I could only go to town if I promised to come back, did you know, even then, that we belonged together?" Elias thought about it, tried to remember what he'd been feeling in those confused, chaotic moments. "I think I recognize something in you. Someone who'd faced darkness and refused to let it win. Someone worth fighting for. Whether I knew we'd end up here." He shrugged. "Maybe not, but I'm glad we did." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the darkness deepen and the stars multiply. From inside, they could hear Thomas reading to Sarah, his voice steady and sure. The sound of children who felt safe enough to imagine futures instead of just surviving present moments. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Reverend Matthews returned to the ranch. This time he brought his Bible and his formal robes, and he stood on the porch that Lydia had decorated with late-season wildflowers, while Elias and Lydia spoke vows that made their family official in the eyes of God and law. Thomas and Sarah stood as witnesses, both dressed in new clothes that actually fit, both beaming with joy. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a meal that featured the ranch's first successful harvest: vegetables from the garden Lydia had planted, bread baked in the oven they'd repaired together, meat from cattle Elias had raised. It was a small celebration, just the 5 of them, but it felt complete in a way that grand affairs never could. They'd built this family from fear and desperation and stubborn refusal to let evil win. They'd paid for it in blood and tears and sleepless nights. And now, finally, they could rest. As winter approached again, the ranch was transformed. The barn was full of supplies. The house had been expanded to accommodate 4 people instead of 1. The children's room upstairs, Daniel's old room, rang with laughter instead of echoes. And at night, Elias no longer lay awake listening for danger. He slept peacefully, knowing the people he loved were safe under the same roof. Victor Hale was hanged on the first day of December in a public execution that drew hundreds of witnesses. Elias and Lydia didn't attend. They'd already given enough of their lives to that man. They spent the day instead teaching Thomas how to care for the horses and watching Sarah build elaborate snow fortresses in the yard. News reached them later that evening. Victor had gone to his death unrepentant, claiming until the end that he'd done nothing wrong, that he was a victim of jealousy and conspiracy. No one believed him. Even in death, the weight of his crimes pressed down too heavily for lies to lift. That night, after the children were asleep, Elias and Lydia stood on the porch and looked out over the snow-covered prairie. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. The same land that had witnessed so much suffering, so much injustice. But it was also the land where truth had finally triumphed, where good people had stood against evil and won. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked. "Helping us that night? Everything that followed?" "Not for a second. Even though you almost died? Even though you lost your peaceful life? That wasn't living. That was just existing." He pulled her close, feeling her warmth against the cold. "You and the children. You brought me back to life, gave me purpose, gave me a reason to care about tomorrow." "We gave each other that," she corrected. "None of us would have survived without the others." She was right. It hadn't been one person saving the rest. It had been all of them, supporting each other, believing in each other, refusing to let go even when letting go would have been easier. The months turned into years. Thomas grew tall and capable, eventually taking over much of the ranch work and proving himself as skilled as any man twice his age. Sarah lost her fear completely, blossoming into a bright, talkative child who filled the house with stories and songs. And Lydia. Lydia became the heart of their home, the steady presence that held them all together. New children arrived over those years. Some stayed temporarily, placed with them by territorial authorities who knew Elias and Lydia would give them safety and love while permanent homes were found. Others stayed forever, joining the family that seemed to have infinite capacity for expansion. The ranch prospered, not because of ruthless business practices or exploitation, but because good work done with honest hands tends to yield good results. They never became wealthy, but they never went hungry either. They had enough, and enough was more than most people could claim. 5 years after that first desperate night in the barn, Elias stood on the same spot where he'd first seen Lydia, soaked and exhausted and carrying the weight of the world. Now that barn was full of laughter and animals and children learning to care for both. The crates that had once held evidence of horrors now held tools and grain and ordinary supplies for ordinary life. Thomas found him there, now 13 and looking more like a young man than a boy. "Pa," he said. The name had come naturally after the adoption was finalized. "There's someone at the door, says she's looking for her daughter, says she was taken by the Hale operation." Elias's heart clenched. After all these years, families were still searching, still hoping. "Bring her to me." The woman was maybe 40, worn down by years and searching, but with eyes that still held hope. She clutched a photograph in trembling hands. "Her name is Margaret," the woman said. "Margaret Sullivan. She was taken when she was 14. They told me she was dead, but I never believed them. I couldn't. A mother knows." She held out the photograph. "Have you seen her? Do you know anything?" Elias looked at the photograph and felt the world tilt. The face staring back at him was older, but the eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. Sarah's eyes. "Thomas," Elias called. "Get Sarah and get Lydia." When Sarah came down the stairs, the woman gasped, dropped the photograph, and staggered. Sarah stopped, confused, then looked at the woman more closely. Something flickered across her face, recognition too deep for conscious memory, knowledge that lived in the bones. "Mama?" she whispered. The woman sobbed and opened her arms, and Sarah ran to her. They collided in an embrace that was 5 years overdue, both of them crying, both of them holding on like they'd never let go again. Lydia appeared, took in the scene, and understood immediately. Her eyes met Elias's, and he saw the bittersweet knowledge there. They were about to lose Sarah. Had always known they might, had prepared themselves for it. But preparation didn't make it easier. The woman, Margaret's mother, looked up from her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. God, thank you. I don't even know your names, but thank you for keeping her safe, for giving her a home when I couldn't." "Sarah is her name now," Lydia said gently. "She chose it, but she's your daughter, and she always will be." They talked for hours about where Margaret had been, how she'd survived, how she'd eventually escaped but couldn't find Sarah. About the years of searching, the false leads, the moment she'd heard about the Hale trial and felt hope flicker back to life. About everything lost and everything, impossibly, found. When she finally left, Sarah rode with her, going home to rebuild a relationship that should never have been broken. But before she left, she hugged Elias and Lydia and Thomas, fierce and tight. "You're my family too," she said. "I'll come back, I promise. I'll come back." And she did. Sarah, Margaret, came back often over the years that followed, bridging 2 families, 2 homes, 2 versions of herself. She brought her mother sometimes, and the 2 families became intertwined, connected by the shared understanding of what they'd survived and overcome. More reunions followed. Other families found their lost children through the records that had been made public. Some reunions were joyful, others bittersweet, a few heartbreaking when children couldn't remember or didn't want to leave the only homes they'd known. But each one was a victory against the darkness that had tried to swallow them. Thomas stayed. When he turned 18, Elias offered to help him find his birth mother, offered resources and time and whatever he needed. Thomas had considered it seriously, then shook his head. "My mother gave me up hoping for a better life for me," he said. "You and Ma gave me that life. I don't need to search for what I've already found." He took over the ranch eventually, married a girl from town, and raised his own children on the land that had sheltered him when he'd had nowhere else to go. The cycle of redemption continuing, generation after generation. Elias and Lydia grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their bodies slowing but their spirits never dimming. They watched their family expand and flourish, watched children become adults, watched justice, imperfect and hard-won, gradually take root in the territory they called home. On a spring evening, 23 years after that first desperate night, Elias and Lydia sat on their porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The wildflowers Lydia had planted decades ago had spread across the entire yard, a riot of color and life. "Do you remember when I asked if you could take us to town?" Lydia said, her hand in his. "Every word, every moment. And you said only if I promised to come back home. Best condition I ever made. I kept that promise," she said. "Kept it every day for 23 years. And you know what? I'd do it again. Every hard moment, every terrifying choice, every sacrifice. I'd do it all again to end up here." "So would I." Elias squeezed her hand gently. "We built something good, didn't we? Something that mattered." "We did. We really did." The sun sank lower, turning the prairie into an ocean of gold. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas's children, their grandchildren, playing and laughing. The sound of family, of continuity, of hope renewed. Somewhere out there, in courthouses and churches and homes across the territory, the effects of that first brave decision to help strangers in need continued to ripple outward. Laws had been changed, systems reformed, lives saved. It wasn't perfect. Evil still existed in the world, still found ways to hurt the vulnerable, but it had been pushed back, its power diminished, its hiding places exposed to light. And in a small ranch in Wyoming, a family built from desperation and courage lived their quiet lives, proof that sometimes the good really do win. Not because winning is easy or guaranteed, but because some people refuse to let evil have the final word. Elias looked at his wife, at the life they'd built together, at the legacy they'd leave behind. And he thought about that night in the barn, about the choice he'd made to help instead of turn away. It had cost him everything he'd thought he wanted: peace, solitude, safety. It had given him everything he'd never known he needed: purpose, love, family. In the end, that was more than enough. That was everything. As the stars began to emerge overhead, Elias spoke softly into the growing darkness. "Can you take us to town?" you asked. "And you answered?" Lydia replied, finishing the story they'd told 100 times to children and grandchildren. "Only if you promise to come back home." "And you did," he said. "You always did." "Because home," she said, "isn't a place you lose. It's someone waiting for you to return." They sat together as night fell completely. Two people who'd found each other in darkness and built a life in light. Their story ending not with flight or fear, but with peace, rooted deep, unshakable, earned through every moment of courage and sacrifice and stubborn, defiant hope. The wind whispered across the prairie, carrying their story forward into the future, a testament to the truth that would outlive them all. That choosing to stand against evil matters. That protecting the vulnerable matters. That one person, making one brave choice in the middle of the night, can change everything. And in the warm glow of lamplight from their home, surrounded by the family they'd built from broken pieces, Elias and Lydia Branton proved that sometimes, against all odds, love and justice really do win in the end.